How can you use your podcast to make profitable connections and grow your business without paid ads, sponsors, or thousands of listeners? Hi, my name is Toby Goodman, and I've been helping my clients to create podcasts to support their business for over 10 years. If you're not interested in fame or a hit podcast, but you have a hunch podcasting could be working for your business or organization, then this video is for you. Maybe you set up a podcast to support your business and it hasn't worked out as you'd hoped. Then this video is for you too. Because over the next almost 4 hours, I'm going to lay out exactly how to plan and position your podcast for business success. And that means using it to attract and retain ideal clients, create powerful referrals and partnerships, and even find top talent. I used to sell this profitable pod method skill sessions as a course for $2,000, but right now I'm going to publish it completely free. Why? Because I'm not trying to be internet famous and I don't love complex, long-winded sales funnels. The work that I enjoy most is about helping my clients one-on-one clarify their goals in business messaging and then plan and position a podcast and related content to help them. How do you know you can trust me? Well, on my website, you'll find a string of testimonials from professionals in coaching, former US government administrators, space industry legends, physicians, and healthcare professionals. And you'll also find my #1 international best-selling book, Narrow Podcasting, written and published before ChatGPT. And just like my book, I've come to learn most people who've bought it won't read it. Most people who read it won't take any action, and the few that do deserve all the success. However, just a few of you who are ready will know the path to success will be smoother with my help. And I only want to work with a handful of you at any one time because, frankly, I don't want to spend all day at my computer. So I have nothing to lose, and that's why I'm giving it all away for free, because I like helping people, and I'm going to assume that you might like it, and as a result, might be in a position to work with me and or my production team. So let's get started. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to know to set up your podcast and use it to attract and retain clients, create powerful referrals and partnerships, and find top talent. Welcome to the Profitable Pod Method Skill Sessions. I'm Toby Goodman from narrowpodcasting.com. Now, these sessions are based on my best-selling book, Narrow Podcasting, and are focused on using podcasting to grow your business. And that means using your podcast to attract and retain clients, create powerful referrals and partnerships, and find top talent without focusing on the masses. That means no ads, sponsorship deals, or large listener numbers. So, fair warning, the Profitable Pod Method skill sessions are not for you if you're trying to create a podcast as a business. And if your business isn't already up and running, I strongly suggest you ensure you focus on that before distracting yourself with a podcast. Finally, even in cases where you don't think you need to watch the session, you might want to double check to see if you've missed anything. There are 3 phases, and this is phase 1. Pre-production, and it's about prep. It aims to address all the things you need to consider and do before you start recording. There are 11 skills sessions arranged over 5 parts, and all the links are bookmarked in the description. So let's get started with getting clear on your podcast goals. By the end of this session, you will list the only 3 reasons to have somebody as a guest on your show, identify the good, better and best reasons to have that person on your show, identify the kind of business owner you are at the moment, and decide if it's worth outsourcing elements of your podcast production so that you can spend more time doing what you do best. Some things to keep in mind before you start your podcast. Number 1, you only need and want to be well known by the people that matter. We'll get to who those people are soon. Most people will never become your customers or your clients. And you don't need a ton of listeners to make money from your podcast. I honestly believe this, that podcasts are the ultimate marketing tool for any freelance, professional or business owner. 3 things wannabe podcasters tend to struggle with are self-confidence and imposter syndrome, whether that's just starting or talking into a microphone, technical know-how, and time and energy. Let's go through each of those a little bit more. So when it comes to self-confidence and imposter syndrome, your podcast can be made to sound professional with the help of professional editing, various bits of software. And you really don't need to get into the weeds about learning a new technical skill. There's lots of things you can do to outsource and overcome that. You don't always need to be interesting. It's often way more powerful to be interested in your guests by asking thoughtful questions. So much of this depends on how you position your podcast. Number 3, podcasts are the perfect format for introverts as they're more intimate than public speaking and webinars. I find talking on podcasts, talking on Zoom, talking on the phone, no problem at all. I don't love speaking on stage, to be honest, at all. But podcasts are a fantastic platform for people who are more introverted like me. Suffice to say, you don't need to be a professional performer to be a great host. So why are podcasts so powerful? Well, podcasts are intimate because it's a one-on-one conversation between you and your listener, or you, your guest, and your listener. Think about it. Most of us who are lucky enough to hear heard our mother's voice before we saw her, before she held us in her arms. And the voice is a very, very personal thing. There's a fantastic story that Julian Treasure, whose book How to Be Heard is Awesome, tells about how Pythagoras used to put a screen up in front of his students so they weren't distracted by the visual. The audio-only aspect of podcasting heightens the hearing and the listening. So podcasts are powerful because they perform a specific function for a specific audience. They're super, super niche. When you get it right, we know that. And I think podcasts now have matured quite a lot in the last few years. So you're seeing that all the time. Like I say, look, the human voice has a power like no other. And that voice without visuals often creates a stronger, more emotive connections. In order to be successful at podcasting, as a business owner, you need to get narrow and get in with the right people. Create a meaningful connection and find the business you want. This is only about being seen and heard by the people you can serve best. Frankly, not much else matters. Rather than thinking about getting yourself out there, think about how you can get yourself in there and who you need to get in with to move your business forward. These people aren't just your prospective clients. So technical know-how. There are a few ways this happens. Pre-production, production, and post-production roughly translates to before, during, and after. It's a term that we use in the music industry, which is the industry I'm initially from. If we think about the work you're doing right now, you're definitely in that pre-production phase. You're ideating, you're working out how to position it, who your target market is, all of that stuff you're going to get to. And then eventually you're going to start producing intros and outros, and maybe these assets, these parts of your podcast that you use over and over again. Your artwork, the font on your artwork, the colors as well, all of the visual branding that goes with it, all of that stuff. And then once your podcast is planned and positioned and you're ready to go, you're going to be dealing with pre-production activities like booking guests, production like recording the conversation, and then post-production, which is where maybe you edit the ums and the ahs out and all of that stuff. For me and for the work I do, the post-production is where I focus with my clients most of the time, because the post-production in my world needs to continue for much longer. The post-production and the follow-up is what most people forget about, because frankly, I know it's hard. You put a podcast episode out into the world and you're done. But the truth is you won't get the most out of it if you just press publish and walk away. So pre-production, Production, post-production, time and energy. You can outsource about 80% of the work required to produce a high quality podcast that sounds good, right? So hire a professional team as soon as you're able. Some of you already know my team at CXS Partners does that all day, every day, and they actually understand business and business growth rather than vanity podcasting. Podcasts save you time when it comes to creating unique content, right? I don't want you to ever have to succumb to the swirly font quotes by dead people LinkedIn posts, right? If you're an experienced, brilliant professional, then a natural way of getting what it is you know out into the world is by talking to somebody or writing about it and broadcasting it using a podcast. And you can repurpose episodes quickly without huge costs and certainly without a lot of time if you know where to go. So what kind of podcaster are you? Well, you're either someone who's already famous and you want to boost your profile. You're a creative person who's looking to get paid for your passion and you want a podcast. Or maybe you're a caring business owner who is looking to scale. This is what I'm interested in. This is the content I make. It's for people who are in a profession and they're looking to grow and scale. You may be elements of the above. I'm sure you are creative. Maybe you're a little bit famous in your world, but mainly you're looking to use this to scale. 3 reasons to invite someone on your show. Don't forget, existing clients or past clients are already in this bucket because you can create really powerful case study episodes here. And those kinds of episodes enable you to show the results you get rather than tell people, right? It also deepens your connection with your client, right? So it's a fantastic way of retaining. Next kind of guest, they are a powerful referrer. They're either powerful for somebody specific, you know they know somebody, right? Which is a really good place to be. Or because you know they hang around in circles and have networks that you'd love to have access to. Reason number 3, they're a potential joint venture partner for you. So look for collaborations. The person that just fixed my roof should have a business card of a plumber he's in a joint venture with, for example. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I have no idea. But potential joint ventures, who can you be working with who serve your target market but get a different result? So what are the outcomes, good, better, or best, for having someone on your show? Now, so long as you keep to these kinds of people, you should start seeing these results. You will start seeing these results, right? The absolute best outcome is that these people will hire you, they'll refer you, or they will partner with you, which is the best outcome for both you and them. And that is a win-win, right? This isn't about putting the thumb screws on and getting a deal. You're looking at getting the best for everyone. And you only want to work with people you like. So yeah, they'll hire you, refer you, or partner with you. Simple as that. Maybe they'll do all of those things in time. A better outcome is maybe once the episode is published, they will actively talk to people in and around your target market about you. So it's your job to make sure those people know how to talk about you. So a good outcome is just that they share it with people in their network. And so it's up to you to produce a podcast episode that is remarkable enough for them to want to share it and prevent them from giving the same old stuff that they do on everyone else's podcast if they're used to doing that. We covered in a different skill session, but that is really a great way of framing these outcomes, right? If you can't see any of these outcomes being likely from someone you're thinking of inviting onto your podcast, do not invite them. Do not dilute your content. Just don't do it. So what kind of business owner, what type of business owner are you? Maybe you make 6 to 7 figures. Maybe you've got a virtual assistant and outsource some of the work that you don't enjoy doing and you're not good at. Maybe you've figured out your target audience and offer and it's all converting regularly. You invest in things that allow you to scale without having to do more work. Or you're making less than 6 figures right now. You don't have a team. You're doing all the things in your business. You aren't super clear on your offer or target market, and you would rather save money by investing your time. Be honest with yourself. You can't suddenly get a massive team so you can swan about in your boat. So when you look at this stuff and you think, okay, I would like to start moving away, what are the things you can delegate next? What are the lowest value tasks you're performing today that cost you more time than you care to admit, and that you could actually hire someone else to do for you? And so when it comes to your podcast, you can do the maths. What is 1 hour of your time worth approximately? 1 hour of usable audio can sometimes take people up to 12 hours to produce if they are new to producing audio. You will produce approximately 3 hours worth of podcasts a month with 2 solo episodes and 2 interviews. If you do that, that's a lot of hours. So the real question is, what is 36 hours of your time worth? Your effective hourly rate, thanks to James Schramko for this, your revenue per month minus your costs, that's your profit. Divide that by the number of hours you work, and that's what your effective hourly rate is, right? Check out more of that, by the way, in James Schramko's book called Work Less, Make More. It's a game changer. It's short. It's really good. So the question is it worth it for you to outsource that process? If it's not, it's cool. I'm not trying to prevent you from doing a podcast, but if there are elements, even elements of the production process that you hate, get them outsourced. Normally, it's the techie cutting out R's and ums and all of that stuff, right? Oh, and by the way, if you enjoy that, be careful, because it's still not a high value task. And you've heard the phrase, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just be careful on that stuff. So do these things next. Write down your reasons for wanting to start a podcast. Work out, how do you think a podcast can help you achieve your business goals? Identify what type of business owner you are now. I gave a couple of examples earlier, but where are you? Do you have anyone working for you? Are you on your own? Can you delegate this stuff? Have you got the right team around you to be able to delegate this stuff? All of that stuff. Just have a little self-audit and see what you come up with. And then in terms of the podcast, is it worth it for you to get help, or do you want to DIY? Here's what we've covered. We've listed the only 3 reasons to have someone as a guest on your show. We've talked about the good, better, and best outcomes about having a guest on your podcast. We've talked about the kind of business owner you are today. And then all of that should have helped you decide if it's worth it to outsource elements of podcast production so that you can spend more time doing what you do best. Welcome to this skill session. This is 5 ways to get your podcast heard by your ideal listeners. I'm Toby Goodman. This is a pre-production skill session, and that means ideally you do this work before you create your podcast, or just as you're starting to think about improving, repositioning, rebranding the podcast you already have. Now, by the end of this session, you will be able to leverage these 5 ways to get your podcast heard by your ideal listeners. Number 1, keep it short and sweet. The amount of time someone will invest in you is directly proportional to the amount of trust you have earned with them. This is something Michael Port taught me, or said. I'm not sure if it's a direct quote, but it's so powerful. You think about it. The more you know someone, the more you trust them, the more time they'll want to spend hanging out with you. So your solo episodes, where it's just you on your own, talking into a void, should be short, because you're only one voice, you're only one sound. So my tip here is just demonstrate the stuff you have, be useful to them, and let them get on with what they have to do. Your interview episodes should be around 30 to 45 minutes long once they've been edited. So give yourself maybe 1.5 hours to have that interview, to have that conversation. But understand that after people have coughed and ahed and ummed, this will be edited down to something more like 30 to 45 minutes. And a lot of that depends on your guest's ability to speak and technical issues and all that kind of stuff. Ask yourself every single time, is this podcast interesting or is it useful? Academic stuff is always interesting to some people, but is it helpful? Is it helpful to your client? Don't confuse your technical knowledge and what you find interesting with what your clients and your listeners might actually find helpful and useful. Is it useful to the people you want to serve? Above all, always respect your listeners' time. You can make just about anything, money, whatever, but you cannot make time back. So, number 2, use eye-catching titles. Headline plus with guest's name. For example, improve your sourdough bread skills with Gina Lou Tone. Does what it says. Here are some ideas of how to get you started using these prefixes for headlines. So how to, discover how, do you recognize, why you shouldn't, do not. These are a mix of towards and away from, the middle one being intrigue. How are you going to pull people in, right? Use eye-catching titles. You can also use social proof in your headlines, like discover how Toby Goodman helps his clients cut 99% of their marketing activities and still grow their business. While that headline is way too long for a podcast title, you can shorten it to how to help your clients cut up to 99% of their marketing activities and still grow, right? You can condense these things, but start there, and that's a great way of giving results-based titles. Launch with 10 episodes. Controversial, often contested. I still really like it because of this basic point. You're offering your listeners a buffet to choose from, right? So your first 5 or 5 of your 10 can be solo podcasts. So these are the short ones, remember. They're not hard to do. Just probably cut the long one you were going to do into 5, right? This is about answering FAQs, the kind of frequently asked questions that your current clients and your prospective clients come to you all the time with. This alone as an asset for you is going to save you loads of time, because every time someone asks you that, not only could you show them maybe a FAQ on the website, you can point them to a podcast that lets them hear you talk about whatever the answer is to that question. Super powerful, and will keep paying you back all the time, along with saving you time as well. So when it comes to the other 5 of the 10, if you can, line up 5 strong guest interviews, and don't think about high profile people. You may not have access to high profile people, so you may be relieved by me telling you this. Think about the people in your network who have got your back and who will share what's happening. And the idea then is that you've launched with, if you can launch with 10, do it. Because when those listeners come, they'll be probably most likely coming from your guests. And when those people come, they won't come for you. They'll come from your guest. They'll come for your guest. And when your guest is heard and they love the interview, they love what you've put together, they'll fall in love with you. So the worst thing that you could possibly do is not have anything else for them to listen to, which is why having the buffet option is the way forward. These are 10 access points. They're not in sequence. Podcasts are join any time. The other reason why some people say this is good, and I have no idea if it's true or not, maybe it used to be true, I'm not sure, is that it's really good for organic website traffic. And it does stand to reason, right? If you can give the search engines, Google, etc., 10 pieces of content and you publish them in one hit, that's awesome. They say you should publish them on one day with about 5 or 6 minutes between each. So when each time Google refreshes its content, you're giving it another hit of content for 10 times across a couple of hours or whatever it might be. Number 4, create a 1-minute trailer. It forces you to be clear on what your podcast is about and who it's for. Always useful. And if you've done the first skill session about getting clarity, you should have that down. If you don't, probably worth checking that one out. It ensures you're ready to start publishing and all the platforms have accepted your show because your RSS feed is complete. It syndicates to all the right places and ensures distributions to all platforms automatically. So those platforms being Apple, Spotify, all the places people find podcasts. You're going to be using a podcast hosting company that will send your podcast to all of those places where people listen, whether it's Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, whatever is the latest podcast player du jour. You want to be using a host that does that. Most do, and it's a different subject, but some take time. So when you have a trailer, it means that it's been accepted. It might take a day or so to happen, maybe a couple of days, but by the time you're ready to properly launch, you won't have any problems with publishing. You can use your trailer to let your network know what's coming. Super exciting. Great to have some marketing content out there and tease your thing. And finally, it's a great professional looking tool you can use to invite your ideal guests onto your podcast. It's really quite difficult to invite guests, especially those you don't know, onto a podcast that doesn't already exist. So at least with a trailer, you are showing intent. You are showing a level of professionalism, a level of production quality. They'll hear it, they'll hear what you're saying on your trailer, and they'll think, yes, I would like to be on that. So use it as an invitation strategy as much as your own out there marketing strategy. Finally, number 5, get personal with your listeners. Hi everyone versus welcome, thanks for joining me are completely different. You are not on a prime time chat show on a Saturday night. You don't have a ton of fans. This is not what this stuff is for, right? This stuff is for business owners who are trying to grow, trying to connect with a small, powerful network of people. Your podcast is not your business. It's a tactic and a strategy to get you more business. So talk to people directly. Don't try and be a show person, especially if you haven't done it before. Just think of it as having a conversation directly with a client or a friend. Plan your episodes with a single objective: to be in the ear of your listener for X number of minutes every single week. Okay, so next steps. You can decide how you're going to leverage these 5 ways to cut through the noise and get into the ears of your target listeners. What we've covered in this session is to leverage these 5 ways to get your podcast heard by your ideal listeners. And they are: number 1, keep it short and sweet. Number 2, use eye-catching titles. Number 3, launch with 10 episodes. If you can, please do it. Number 4, create a 1-minute trailer. Absolutely essential. Number 5, remember to keep that tone personal. This is Create Your List Building Freebie skill session. It's pre-production, so that means you should look at doing this before you create your podcast or when you're in the process of rebranding, relaunching the podcast you have. By the end of this session, you will decide and design your list building freebie, aka a lead magnet. So what is a list building freebie, often referred to as a lead magnet? Well, number 1, a short, valuable resource that helps your ideal listener get one step closer to their ideal result, to solving a burning problem. Your ideal listener, of course, is also your ideal client or referrer or partner. It can be a PDF guide that takes no more than 5 to 15 minutes for your ideal customer to consume. It can be a sequence of emails. It can be an evergreen webinar or a link to a video. Now, the main thing is that you think of your lead magnet or your list building freebie as the mechanism that powers the train that moves your target market from where they are, normally procrastinating on social media or even actively looking for a solution to a problem you can solve, over to a distraction-free environment that you control and you curate. And that's your podcast, that's your website, that's your stuff away from other platforms. So why does your podcast need this freebie or this opt-in or this lead magnet? Well, it builds your list and allows you to follow up and communicate with the people who are interested in you, what you offer, what you do. Because your business needs a list of customers, right? Or potential customers. Permission-based marketing is about building trust. And while you're not asking for money, by setting this up, you are asking for permission to communicate with people in your target market. So what's something you could offer them that would genuinely help them where they are in exchange for them allowing you to start a conversation with them? Identify the problems and the challenges your target market have. Identify the results that they want. Choose the most burning problem or single biggest result you think that they want and create your freebie around that. You can create a PDF guide or other no-brainer incentive type things. So, for example, the guide to solving this burning problem or the guide to getting this single biggest result. So it's either a problem or a result that they want. In most markets, people are more interested in solving problems than getting results, but it could differ depending on where you are in your business and who your target market is. So have a think about that as well. So some examples include free shipping. Just offering free shipping on a product or a book you may have might incentivize people to sign up. A contest, a discount, a bundle offer, a free tool, a template, a free trial, a webinar, a free course, an ebook, a report, a survey. Examples: free consultation, a gift card, access to a community, maybe even inside a Facebook group, a quiz, a planner. Now, I've tried a number of these things, and most of my clients, most of the people that are watching this don't have products, so a lot of these won't apply. But the point is, all of these can be at the front end of a relationship to entice people to sign up for something that means that you have permission to communicate with them beyond them getting the discount or whatever it might be. Iterate, test. If you're at a standing start, just ask yourself, what would be the easiest? Now, a free consultation is not good if you're already scaling up, but it might be a good way of getting some initial clients in the door. When it comes to the free consultation, the main thing is to just set boundaries, because the challenge with those things is people come in, they pick your brain, they get what they need, and they never return again. So make sure that you've set boundaries there. If you're still lost, here's an easy way to start. Write down the 5 most frequently asked questions your clients have asked you before they paid you. This can be your first draft. I don't necessarily recommend that you start paying for lots of traffic initially until you've seen on a small scale using social media and your initial network of people how this stuff is coming across and what people are saying about it. So don't chuck thousands of dollars at Google ads or what have you. Now, this is where I am. I'm not looking for lots of clients. So at the moment, I'm using LinkedIn Premium, which does cost an amount a year. So I can take advantage of this clickable link area. Now, most people use this bit and it just says my services or visit my website. You're actually able to change the copy on the text here. So I've changed the copy to display a result my clients want, right? And at the moment, how to get clients seems to be a pretty successful click-through rate. And that leads to a page where there is no email address required, which is this page here. And then at the bottom, it leads to that opt-in. which is more specific to the podcasting, the how of what I do. Now, this lead magnet tactic has been around for a while, right? Seth Godin, permission-based marketing, it's been around for quite a long time. So I figure if I deliver a short burst of value, which is the page when they click, it's not a clickbait if it actually delivers what it promises, right? Those bullet points, how I get clients through conversations, or how you get clients through conversations, they are genuinely real bullets, right? So that is the immediate result. They're not showed an ad, they're not asked to opt in, they get the information. And then there is a further benefit they can get if they sign up. So I figured deliver a short burst of value through that micro commitment of a link click before showing them that form. So next steps. Get started. Create your list building freebie. What we've covered? Well, we've covered designing your list building freebie. I've given you a ton of ideas. You're going to pick the easiest one and get started, or maybe you're going to tweak what you already have if it's changed your perspective on what that is. How to engage with your listeners beyond your podcast. In this session 4, I'll talk more about the place email has in your podcast strategy and show you a bit more about what you need to set up in advance so you can get the most from your podcast for your business. It's possible that you already have an email marketing system in place for your business. If so, this will serve to help you integrate your podcast into what you're already doing. I'm not here to give you more work. I'm here to help you be more effective with what you're doing already. But if you're not using email to communicate to your prospects and clients, past and present, I strongly advise you do so. So reasons to use email. Well, primarily because if you don't, you're undoubtedly leaving money and relationships on the table, and also because you should 100% own permission to contact people and not leave it to a third-party social media platform lest your account gets closed or hacked and all that kind of nefarious stuff. Now, while the narrow podcasting profitable pod method stuff I teach isn't about getting loads of listeners, if you create a podcast that speaks to people in and around your target market, at some point you will and you should expect to get discovered by more of the right kind of people. Now, as per session 3, listeners and visitors to your website should have the opportunity to sign up and get your free thing, but that is only the beginning. So contact email addresses are business insurance, and relationships worth having need nurturing. The good news is, once you have an email template set, as a podcaster, you'll never be stuck for content to draw from your well of content, right? So by the end of this session, you simply should have enough to do the following 2 things. Number 1, write your freebie confirmation email, so the email that goes out when someone actually signs up for your thing. And number 2, create some version of a weekly email template that can change. I'm more of a fan these days of short emails than long ones. But again, depending on your audience, you might want to test and measure these things. I'm certainly one for doing a lot of that as well. So what you need to do is also, if you haven't already, sign up for an email service provider if you don't already have one. ConvertKit, ActiveCampaign, and even website builders like Squarespace all have these systems integrated now. And if you don't have a big list, you don't need anything fancy. Start small. You don't need a massive subscription on your hands. So what to include in this freebie confirmation email? Well, what I wanted to do was share my email with you so you can see the kind of thing I'm doing. You want to link back to the freebie, and you want to tell them so what to include in your freebie confirmation email. Well, you want to link back to the freebie in the text. So you're sending someone the guide or the PDF or the video, whatever you've promised. And you also want to tell them about yourself and a bit about your podcast. You want to let them know what they can expect from you in terms of weekly emails or whatever. And also, you might want to tell them how they can work with you if they just want to skip to the front of the line, right? Don't put unnecessary barriers up. My first email at the moment looks like this. The email says, "Hi, thanks for being here. In 2014, I discovered a way to use my podcast to build my business. Word got out and soon professionals, including executive coaches, educators, healthcare leaders, and even legends in the space industry began hiring me. With the help of my duck, I explained my exact method in this short video." Now that video links to a 25-minute version of a talk I've given about getting clients with your podcast. If you didn't already know, I am someone who has flown around the world with a plastic duck to deliver that talk. So what that does is it links to the value, and it also creates a bit of curiosity because I'm not actually telling them what that video is, but it does deliver. There is a duck in it. Okay, so on with the copy. If you're anything like me, you don't like wasting time. So here's a heads up. My emails are not for you if you're starting a business, you don't like hard work, you don't get British humour. Sorry, humour, then spelt without the U or the extra U. Anyway, so that's just a simple enemy in common type, not for you piece of copy that works quite well. I don't want people on my list who are just getting started. I work with people who've already established businesses to a certain degree. So then it moves on. Still here? If you're open, tell me, who is your primary target market? What sort of results are you getting for them? And what is next for your business? Let me know. I'd be happy to support you where I can. And that's the end of the email. So what I've done is, if we break it down, I've seeded credibility. I've talked about the kinds of people I work with, the kind of professionals I work with. So I'm hoping for some alignment there when people read. I've introduced my duck as curiosity, and I've linked to a piece of very valuable content that's 20-ish minutes long. If you're anything like me, you don't like wasting time. So I've gone for the enemy in common stuff. And then I've opened with some questions. I want to know who they're working with, who their primary target market is. I don't want them to tell me it's people. I want to understand what sort of results they're getting rather than what they do. So if they can articulate that they've reduced attrition, or they've increased revenue, or they've helped people get through trauma, or whatever it is that they do as professionals, I'm interested in how they phrase the results side of what they're doing. And what's next for their business? What are they looking for? What's the stretch goal? And if they answer those questions and reply, I'm going to give them, what I can. If I can't give them anything, I might say, by the way, you should check out this person. I think they might help you. I'm not necessarily promising anything, but I'm opening a dialogue here. So this is one big thing from email list people, is that they broadcast. They're on broadcast only. If you're sending an email out to an email list, you should also invite people to reply, right? Just because it's quite clear you're sending an automated email doesn't mean that in most cases you shouldn't be able to be contacted, right? This is about starting and opening a conversation. Cool. So what to include in a weekly email? Well, you might want to let them know what's on the podcast this week and link to the episode, of course. You might want to let them know what's coming up. Either it's a sneak preview of what's coming up on the podcast or any other stuff you're working on. So it could be events, in person, online, certain industry things, whatever it is that might help them. And it might not need to be your content. You could just let them know about something in the wider industry. And then let them know how you can work with them. They can work with you. How you can work with me. That's what it says on the bullet. So your next steps. Write that freebie confirmation email. Doesn't need to be any longer than the one I've just shown you. Could be shorter. and create some version of a template and think, right, what would I like to tell people every week just to keep in touch with them? And then if you haven't already, do make sure that you sign up for an email service so you've got all of that stuff ready to go once your podcast launches, because you will make some noise when your podcast launches, and you want to make sure you benefit from every single listener, every person that has found your podcast, whether it's through your original channels or whether it's through the podcast listening apps. So we've covered in this session writing your freebie confirmation email with links out to the valuable content, and also talked about creating your weekly email template. Get your website podcast ready, as this is a pre-production phase 1 skill session. This is something you should be doing before you create your podcast or as part of your podcast rebrand. By the end of this session, you'll be able to get your website ready to host your freebie. That's your lead magnet, your free download, your free thing, and also your podcast. Your website is a key pillar in your sales cycle, so make sure that it is set up right. I want to make a really big point here. If you already have a business, I don't want you creating a new website for your podcast. This is just going to be about improving and getting your existing business website ready. If you need a new one because you're having a rebrand, that's another thing. But you shouldn't be creating a new website for a podcast only. So, how to set up your website so that it can host your podcast and everything links together beautifully. Your website should be easy to navigate with clear links to your offers, your services, your products, and of course also your podcast. Make sure that your freebie sits above the fold. So this is something I spoke about in another skill session you can check out. What you want to make sure as far as your website is concerned is that this is something people can see as soon as they get onto your website, so that there is no scrolling required before they opt in to get your thing. And you want to publish your podcast in a blog form on your website. So individual entries for each episode, which means each episode has a separate URL, which is really useful. You don't want to drive a specific person to a specific episode and then have them look for it in potentially hundreds of episodes. And then after the freebie is shown, you want to show your podcast in a gallery view with thumbnail artwork, with the most recent episodes showing, and then a button to display more. So you're showing people your most recent work and the most recently published stuff. And you also want to, on your website, be able to link out to the major podcast platforms from your website, because as much as we want to bring people in to your website and into your business, people probably won't actually listen regularly to your podcast on your website. That's not how that works. So people will prefer to listen on Apple or Spotify or any of the podcast players that may be popular. They seem to change all the time, but certainly those two. So you want to link to those two. A couple of others. TuneIn is another one, and so it goes on. So on that page, you want to show, yes, my podcast is available where you already listen, and here's the link to that. So ideally they set that up and they subscribe on their probably phone, and when they've subscribed or followed your podcast, then your most recent episodes will refresh in their podcast feed, wherever it is they're getting that stuff. Right, let's look at a website as an example. The Inter Astra Institute is a non-profit that creates equitable access and opportunity in the business of space. The way it does that is it builds communities, it hosts events. So that's why the headline is very specific to that. And there's an opt-in, and the offer is get insights, invites, and participate, right? With the button text being join us. So this is above the fold. This is what it looks like when you get there. In the header, you will see about, news, events, the retreat they host once a year, the podcasts. They have a number of podcasts in a network, and then emerging leaders, which is a program, contact, and then the big call to action as a nonprofit is donate rather than contact. Moving on, when we go to Your Business in Space, which is their most regular podcast, you can see above the fold, you've got subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, or listen here. So at the top, you have links out to the two most popular podcast player listener sites, which is Apple and Spotify. As you scroll down, you're seeing the podcast episodes in tile format, and you can click on them to get more show notes and to listen there. And there's also going to be more links back out to the normal podcast players, Apple, Spotify, etc. The next thing you should make sure you've checked off your list is that your website is talking to your email service provider or CRM system, so that when people do opt in to get the free thing, they don't just get a free thing and that's it. You are storing their email address, and then you're able to communicate with them on a weekly basis. And we've talked about that in another skills session video. That video is called Engage with Your Listeners Beyond Your Podcast. So that mechanism needs to be set up. I strongly recommend you create a podcast episode template page and have a documented upload process. Some of this you may be able to delegate depending on if you're using a production company like CXS Partners, or if you're doing it yourself, just make sure you've got these processes set up so you can easily create a template you can easily replicate. You want to design your process to upload an episode and then decide who will do what. And this is really key, because if you're not already using a professional production company, you really should be looking to do that and setting up a system that you can hand off and delegate. If you have a really big team, it might be that certain people inside the team can do that bit. So next steps, add your freebie above the website fold, as you've just seen. Make sure that's in place. Create a podcast template, an episode template page for your blog. Design your upload process. Make sure you've got everything systemized, and then decide who's going to do what. If it's not you, if you're fully outsourcing to a company like mine, or you are using elements of that and delegating it out to a member of your team. Side note, if they're not audio professionals and trained in audio, don't delegate that bit. What I'm talking about is the process of getting everything up onto the website already. So if you have a website person, then this is the video they should be looking at, and this is the video that they should be taking notes on to implement and add to the website that you're already running. So what we've covered in this session, super simple, is to get your website ready for your freebie, your lead magnet, and also your podcast. Get your offers in place. This is something you absolutely have to have set up before you press record on your podcast, before you rebrand your podcast, all of this stuff, because remember, narrow podcasting and the profitable pod method skill sessions are all about using podcasts to grow your business. So I just wanted to check to make sure that you actually had a business. And if you're not quite sure, then you can use the following few minutes just to check to see if your business is where it should be before you start your podcast. So by the end of this session, you will have thought about and checked you have the right offers in place for a profitable podcast, the kind of podcast that grows your business. Very important point. You need an offer that converts already. And that means you're already selling something regularly, whether that's a service or a product. You know you have a business when someone is repeatedly coming to you for whatever it is you do, the product or service, or a group of people. And ideally, you're in a position where you can scale, or you have plans to scale. That requires an amount of delegation perhaps at some point. That will probably require an amount of delegation at some point. Your offer needs to be profitable enough to be making you money. I don't want you starting a podcast thinking it's going to save your business. If your business is broken because you don't have an offer that converts, starting a podcast is probably a distraction at this point. So if you are bringing money in through your business and you want to scale in some way, a podcast is a fantastic way to do it. If you're already bringing money in but you're too busy, a podcast is a great way of buying some time back for you and still servicing your clients. If your business is growing like wildfire and you need to hire people, a podcast is a great way to help you do that. But make sure that you are already in some capacity generating business from your business. And that means you need to have a clearly defined target market that you want to reach with your podcast. It doesn't really matter if you're not reaching a mass market with a narrow podcast. This is about talking to a specific target market. As I always say, either people in your target market, people who hang around your target market, whether they be powerful referrers or whether they be joint venture partners or a combination of all those three things. The mini, midi and macro investments your listeners and your clients and your prospects are making with you. Number one, the mini investment, giving you their email in exchange for your freebie. I've covered this in other skill sessions called Engage with Your Listeners Beyond Your Podcast and creating your freebie, your lead magnet video. All of that stuff explains what that is and why it should live on your website in the previous session. So go and check them out if you haven't already. But this is also something that you're going to place as an advertisement of sorts in your podcast. So make sure that you've got something there that's a catch-all. Your listeners, who may or may not be your clients or prospects at this point, are investing time in exchange for listening to your podcast. So they're spending time with you even though you don't know, which is kind of weird, but is also the reason why you need to have offers inside your podcast and clear signposts to help people know what they are going to do next. And then finally, the larger investments, the macro investments I'm calling on this slide, these people are giving you their time and their money in exchange for your offer. So beyond having the podcast, which is probably going to be free to listen to, your free download or your free course or your free strategy call or any of those things, this is really your core offer. And you may have more than one core offer, but just make sure you've got at least those three things in place. And certainly that middle one there is geared towards time invested using your podcast. So who is your target market? I like to ask this question a lot when people come to me. What results do you help them achieve? I think in one of my welcome emails that I've just written, I've written, what sort of results are you getting for your clients right now? Because I'm more interested in people telling me the outcome of what they do rather than what they do. And then how you help them achieve that result is what you do, right? So your next step is just ensure that you have the right offers in place for a profitable podcast. Specifically, what I'm talking about is making sure, double check you've got that freebie offer that lives on your website, that lives on your social media channel, so people can get something of value from you quickly without you having to show up, unless you're doing the strategy sessions, which I would probably encourage you didn't, unless you were super new to this. Then you've got the podcast, and just knowing that the position of your podcast means people are going to invest time in you. And then your core offer, whether that's a boiler inspection in a home or whether that's a free assessment of some kind, making sure that you've got those there, and then that repeatable core offer. So what we've covered in the session so far is you're going to ensure that you've got those right offers in place for your profitable podcast. And while narrow podcasting is about in there, not out there, so much of this is also about the impression you're creating. And so that's why we spent so much time on the foundation and the shop window stuff, because it really matters. Imagine if you want to speak to somebody on your podcast, interview someone, they're going to want to see how you show up. So be mindful of that and make it really clear what it is that you're doing through the stuff that you're doing on your website and through your positioning of your podcast. Name your podcast. I'm Toby Goodman, and it stands to reason that you should probably have an idea of what your podcast is going to be called before you start recording. So, by the end of this session, you will decide if you're going to name your podcast in a way that speaks to your ideal listener, or if you're going to name your podcast in a way that speaks to the hidden values of your ideal listener. A quick note, you are in the business of creating emotions. Emotions lead to actions. And who you are to the people in your world will depend on the emotion you elicit from them. A well-positioned podcast can get you in front of the right people so you can make more without changing a single thing in your business. And a well-positioned podcast can also give you the authority and ability to charge more so you can work less. So how to name your podcast? First of all, who is your ideal listener? It doesn't always necessarily need to be your ideal client or customer. It could be somebody who's your ideal partner, referral, or even a prospective employee. You can name your podcast so it attracts your ideal listener and repels everyone else. For overt positioning, be specific over clever. A few years back, I was doing some competitive analysis for a client and fellow drummer, and I wrote a single word into the podcast app on my phone, and it changed my life because I found a podcast and a podcaster I was able to connect with. Your chosen podcast app, wherever you may listen, in my case Apple, is a search engine. And people now more than ever use that search box with intent, just like they do when they go onto YouTube to try and work out how to fix a broken washing machine or whatever. Thinking about the way that that's how people behave, use this simple naming strategy. Single biggest result for target market with host name. So that's the biggest result you get for your client, the kind of client you serve, and what your name is. And that language is taken straight from Michael Port's Book Yourself Solid. I help target market get single biggest result. We're just changing it around and using that for podcast naming. The other way is covert positioning. So for covert positioning, it's not as obvious, but you're still naming your podcast in a way that grabs attention. So think about the people you want to be around. Think about the kind of work you want to do and who you can help. They may have a hidden shared value. And I'll show you examples now. Joss is a finance expert, and frankly, his skill set would help any small business owner looking to find ways to increase profit. But Joss likes working with coaches. So profit, single biggest result, for coaches, Joss's target market. Super simple, super effective, nice logo, easy to read, nice picture. So what about covert podcast naming? Karen is a leadership coach, but she's also on a mission to normalize conversations specifically around childhood trauma. Through her work in some of the biggest organizations in the world, she's come to learn that a very high percentage of the leaders she coaches have experienced trauma on one or more levels, and they are very good at hiding it. So this is a pretty magnetic position. There's nothing here about leadership coaching, but the title speaks directly to a literal hidden commonality in her target market. And marketing should be magnetic. And this is a fantastic use of the repellent side of the magnet and use of the podcast medium, because most people listen to podcasts alone, and most people probably won't choose to listen to something called the Trauma Hiders Club. But the people that do, well, they're the kind of people Karen wants to get in front of. So your next steps: decide on your position, overt or covert, and then name your podcast. So what we've covered in this session, we've talked about naming your podcast in a way that speaks to your ideal audience, or naming your podcast in a way that speaks to a unique value you share with your ideal listener or audience member. Welcome to this phase 1 Profitable Pod Method skills session called Design Your Podcast Art. I'm Toby Goodman, and by the end of this session, you will understand what elements to include in your album, episode, and podcast art so you can create a helpful brief for a designer. Understand the elements to include in your podcast album, episode art so you can create either a helpful brief for your designer or at least have some guidelines to make sure you are creating something that looks pretty good. So let's go for a few definitions. Podcast album art is specific to your show. So here is an example of Trauma Hiders Club. I'm really proud of this album art that our designer created for Karen. As you can see, the hiders is hiding. This is the kind of work only a proper designer is going to do, not something I could do. There are a few more album artworks here. Just a screen grab from the internet, some very famous. They all look and feel very different and have clearly been designed by a proper designer and thought about. When a podcast is sitting in Apple Podcasts online, it's going to present its artwork in this way with the episodes over on the right hand side. I'm sure you'll also see versions of that where you probably listen on your phone. However, episode art is specific to your podcast episode, and in narrow podcasting, episode art specific to an episode of your show usually features a guest's headshot. I would recommend that as a strategic move. So here's another one of ours. Kathy Sullivan explores episode with Craig Foster. He's got his photo on the front and some nice design elements. Kathy is somebody who's been to the deepest part of the ocean and also been to space, so that's why you've got water and stars behind. Again, someone has thought about that after learning about who she is, and a designer has taken on those notes. So a few more guidelines. One other point about episode art is now showing up in podcast players now. It didn't used to. It used to always just be the overall podcast art, but we're seeing now, depending on what podcast player you listen through, you'll actually see the specific episode art, not just the album art. So it's probably more important than ever to ensure that you've got a template set up so that you can create episode art as well. A few more guidelines for good podcast art. It's going to grab attention. It's going to create feelings. There's a lot of stuff out there on color psychology. There's a lot of things on fonts and spacing and all of that stuff. If you're not a professional, please don't spend too much time doing it. You may wish to incorporate elements of your existing brand. If you've already got a business with logos and fonts and colors and all of that stuff, and you've hired someone before, you can transfer that and take that over to your podcast. Depending on what kind of business you're in, you also might consider including your own image or photograph to build credibility and authority in your album art. And as I've shown with the episode art, make sure you create other podcast art assets too. These include templates for social media posts and also the banners for social media if you're going to run social media for your podcast or use it as a banner behind your main company's LinkedIn. There's all sorts of sizes. So what you want is you want the individual elements to belong to you. These are business assets for you. So your next steps are to delegate and design your album artwork and to ensure you have all of those assets with the templates, social media, banner, all of that stuff. If you're a bit like me, you might feel like you can jump on Canva and do this stuff. I jump on Canva a lot to kind of sketch things out, but I know that I'm not a professional designer. That said, half an hour on Canva, if I limit myself, if I don't spend too much time having fun, will help create a design brief for a proper designer who can then make sure the spacing's right, check the fonts and all of that stuff, and at least give that designer a good idea of the kind of thing I'm looking for. But if you're not, honestly, this is the kind of thing you really want to delegate. So what we've covered in this session is to understand the elements to include in your album, an episode, podcast art, so you can create a helpful brief for your designer. If you've really got no budget for podcast art, the simpler, the better. Everything that I showed you before had limited text on it. The fonts were big. Remember, this stuff shows up literally in thumbnail size everywhere. So you want it to be able to be read and understood in a very, very small size. Welcome to Identify Your Ideal Podcast Listeners, this profitable pod method skills session. I'm Toby Goodman. By the end of this session, you're going to be able to identify how you fit into your listeners' habits so that you craft your podcast accordingly. We're going to talk about what kind of person you're going to be talking to on your podcast, who they need to be to make sure your podcast grows your business, and really narrow down into the narrow podcasting methodology. So, in narrow podcasting, as somebody who wants to use a podcast to grow your business, your listeners are your prospects. They're also your clients and your past clients. They are powerful referrers. They're friends of the above. They're people who hang around your potential clients. They are people who trust you. Maybe they'll never work with you, but they know you're good at what you do, and they happen to know people who might become a client of yours at some point, and they're also joint venture partners. They could be a combination of any of those. So, questions to answer. Who is your ideal listener? Take a stab at that, write it down. What does a typical day in their life look like? That's interesting to me when I think about when you listen to a podcast. I listen to podcasts typically at two moments in my day, and I don't think I'm unique in that. I listen to podcasts at the gym in the morning, and the kind of podcasts I listen to at the gym in the morning on a weekday are business-related podcasts. In the evening, I tend to listen to comedy podcasts or some sort of softer podcasts that don't have anything to do with my own personal development. I might listen to a news-based podcast, but I'm not in the mindset of thinking about work. So I use podcasts in two ways. I use podcasts to learn, and I use podcasts to relax. And I also, I suppose the third way, if I'm thinking about news, is I just use podcasts to stay informed. And where do they fit into the day is about, well, how long have I got? So if I go on a long walk, which is something I rarely do without people with me, I will listen to a long business podcast. But otherwise, I'm doing it 20 minutes on the treadmill and then moving on. I'm not normally listening to a business-based podcast for longer than that. So realistically, a lot of your listeners will already be listening to podcasts. So you need to take that time maybe from someone else's podcast and convince them to give yours a chance. So where do they fit into that day? If you're doing a podcast for long-distance drivers and travelers and people that fly a lot, then maybe you can afford to do a longer one. But honestly, think about that. To help you, you might also make a list using this matrix. So on the positive side, your ideal listeners and clients, etc., want something now. Or maybe now they're frustrated with something. So in the future, their positives are about what they aspire to be or to do, what their aspirations are. And so the future, their negatives are what's the worst that could happen? Fears. And if you make a list of a few things in each of these four boxes, you will start to create a pretty compelling way of talking to your ideal listeners. Now seems a really good time to also make sure that you're listing who you are not for. A lot of people in marketing talk about the magnet of marketing and how to attract the right people. I really want you to always think about who you need to repel as well, because people that like everything are probably not your ideal clients. People that are interested in a bit of this and a bit of that, probably not your ideal client. Whereas people who stand against something or definitely believe something is not true, if that also aligns with where you are, then they're going to think, wow, this person thinks like me as well. So your next steps are, well, check out a couple of websites. You can check out podcastinsights.com and edisonresearch.com and find out more about listener demographics and habits, because they do change over the years. They changed dramatically during COVID when more people were at home. And now, as I record this in the very last few days of 2024, people are out and about a bit more. That might change again, right? So create a profile of your ideal listener and identify how you fit into their day, how you can tailor your podcast to appeal to your ideal listener and repel everyone else. Well, there you go. We covered in this session how to identify and fit into your listeners' habits so that you craft your podcast accordingly. And that meant I gave you some models around how to think and what to list and think about the kind of position you're going to take from a tone standpoint. Welcome to this Profitable Pod Method skills session called Design Your Podcast Soundscape. I'm Toby Goodman, and by the end of this session, you will be able to either design or delegate your podcast soundscape, certainly be clearer about it, and be clearer on how to brief your team if you have one. So, your soundscape is potentially made up of theme music. You know what theme music is? Sound effects, you probably know what sound effects are as well. Music beds, sonic logos, and event sounds. So let's look at the lesser known ones. A music bed is a piece of music designed to sit behind speech. It changes the atmosphere. So if you think about the news headlines, that music is always designed to create attention underneath the person reading the headlines. And it's also created without a positive or negative feeling, which means that it's often not in a major or a minor key in music terms. So both bad and good news can be read over it. It doesn't need to be changed. Sonic logos are musical representations of a logo or name, and they usually last about 2 to 4 seconds. You're probably most familiar with Intel Inside, that one, or Sega, they're small intervals, they're just a bit longer than an effect. And then event sounds are really short noises that can act as quick transitions between sections or when you want to highlight a point. So on a video game, it's a ding, it's a crash, it's a zoom, it's a single sound. I've heard a page turn as an event sound that will happen just before an ad read in a particularly famous British podcast. So be conscious about matching your music to your tone and remember emotions. Now, music and sound elicit this stuff, and really you can never be 100% sure what literally resonates with people. I once played at a wedding where the groom was left standing at the altar and the attitude was, well, we've paid for this band, so we're going to have a party anyway. But the news hadn't got to us, so we played the first dance as requested anyway. And in that moment, the opening lyrics of Alicia Keys' If I Ain't Got You did not resonate as intended, and we had to stop. Finally, just don't take up too much time with music. You want to get to the point, you want to get to the speech part and use music as an additional production value, but don't go too crazy. Don't make people wait for long amounts of time until you come in. Don't run music for 5-10 seconds before anyone says anything. People have gone to their podcast app to listen to speech-based content, not music. So your next step, design or brief your soundscape with the help of professional podcast production team if possible. You don't have to have all of those elements, but I think if you don't know, you don't know. So now you have some terms. Music beds are really powerful. You're going to want some elements of this to create a professional production. Of course, my team, which you'll find at narrowpodcasting.com, are around to help you with this kind of stuff too. Professional sound designers are experts in matching the tone of your voice to the tone of your music and your podcast. You will find that certain music and certain frequencies complement your voice and others less so, depending on whether you have a high voice or a low voice. And also the tone of your voice will change the choices people will make around the instrumentation. So you can get really detailed on this stuff. Don't try and do it yourself, if at all possible, just like the artwork stuff. If it's not your thing, stay away from it. Your time is better spent somewhere else. So what we've covered in this session, well, design or delegate your podcast soundscape, and you can now be clearer on how to brief your team if you have one. This Profitable Pod Method skills session is the last in phase 1, pre-production planning. I'm Toby Goodman, and this is 5 ducks you need to have in place for your podcast. You can use it as a checklist to ensure you have everything set before you start recording your regular podcast content and moving on to other skill sessions which are more strategy based. Or if you've already started publishing your podcast, you might use it to find ways to improve and streamline your podcasting process. By the end of this session, you're going to be really clear about setting up your website to host your podcast. You're going to create your process in Asana or Trello or some version of a Kanban app. We'll talk about that. You're going to have your tech completely sorted. You're going to understand how to put your legal basics in place. You're going to record your intro and outro. So duck number 1, give your podcast an online home. Your podcast needs to sit on a blog on your business website. That shows credibility and that you're not just another podcaster with a vanity project. You're going to own your website and all the content on it. Make sure that you feature your podcast on your homepage and your podcast page. So the URL should be yourwebsite.com/podcast. Give every episode its own page. So that means yourwebsite.com/podcast/name of episode with guest name. Feature the podcast player at the top of the page so visitors can listen to that podcast directly from your website, as well as having the other links out to the platforms. Duck 2, create your pipeline. This is about planning and pre-production. It's about recording and production and then moving on to distribution and publishing. On the planning and the pre-production side, you need to research the topic and potential guests. You should write a script if you're having a solo show or sketch out some questions for an interview. Make sure you've scheduled your guest, if you have one, into your calendar. I like using Acuity or Calendly, something like that to make it easier. Some people can get offended by that kind of stuff, so depending on the value of the guest to you, you might want to be flexible to their schedule as well. If you can, try and batch record 1 month to 6 weeks at a time in advance so you can actually take some time off. Use a Kanban tool like Asana or Trello to organize everything. Trello is an amazing card system. There's a free version of it, and you can move each podcast episode from idea to invitation accepted all the way along until you've got something published, and we're going to talk a bit more about why that is an amazing tool to have. Asana does a similar thing. I'm sure there's others too. When it comes to recording and production, you need to record the raw materials. So that's your voice and their voice in a mic if you've got a guest. You need to edit the episode, and you need to create an episode trailer too. Ideally, you're creating episode artwork. Then when it comes to distribution and publishing, you need to publish the episode via a host. You need to promote the episode via your channels, whatever social media you're on, and definitely email. And you need to give your guests the best airtime possible. So make sure you do plenty of research, and the more research you do on your guests and the topic, the better the time the guests will have. This is such a key thing in narrow podcasting and the Profitable Pod Method. You want to make sure the guest has a memorable, fantastic time. Talk about that in later skill sessions as well. The whole point is that they have a great time. Duck 3, let's look at your tech specs. You want a decent mic with an XLR output. That's one of those ones with the 3 holes, the 3 pins. You need a decent audio interface like a Scarlett by Focusrite. That's a USB that's going to go into your computer, and then that's going to be the machine that translates your microphone into what your computer needs. Super small, really, really portable. You also need headphones. Make sure they are wired and not Bluetooth, because Bluetooth connections can be a problem. You absolutely don't want a Bluetooth microphone at any point. A silent room with no echo. What that really means is make sure that you've got a lot of soft furnishings around. So blankets, and if you've got the budget, professional sound treatment panels are also fantastic. Duck 4. Legal basics. You don't own anything on your podcast unless you have your own RSS feed. So that means you need a subscription to a hosting company to start and maintain your podcast. Do not be tricked into opting for free podcast hosting or joining a podcast network without doing your research. Please ping me on LinkedIn to ask me my thoughts on hosting. Remember, nothing worth having is 100% free. Check out Gordon Firemark's website, podcastrelease.com, for a free release form and advice on legal issues around podcasting, especially if you have a guest who you think might need that. This is kind of down to you, depends on where you are with your business. Make sure that all the music and artwork you use is either original or rights free or used with permission. You absolutely must do this. Don't steal people's art. That's really bad. Duck 5, your pre-recorded assets. In many cases, having an intro script is a fantastic thing. So welcome to this podcast that does this for this type of person, right? Just a quick bumper at the beginning. You also want one at the end. We also spoke on a different skills session about freebies. So check that skills session out. This is your opt-in, this is your lead magnet script. You may want to have this dynamically inserted, so record this as a separate piece of audio. That's the most important part of this, is record any special offer you have as a separate piece of audio so it is not attached to your intro and outro. So next steps, set up your website to host your podcast, create your Kanban process in Asana or Trello or whatever it might be, get your tech sorted, put your legal basics into place. Make sure that you're covered, especially when it comes to guests. Record your intro and outro and also those dynamic ads. So what have we covered in this session? Website, Kanban, tech, legal, and those audio assets that will be used in every single episode. Okay, now that you've covered everything in phase 1, which is all the skills sessions up to this one, which is number 11. Now we're going to get into the really cool stuff around building your business using a podcast. Welcome to phase 2, production. In phase 2, there are 11 sessions all focused on the creation of your podcast, from presentation and interview skills to repurposing your podcast content. If you'd like support with planning, positioning, or production, remember you can get in touch with me, Toby Goodman, over at narrowpodcasting.com. So moving on, write your podcast episode scripts. By the end of this session, you're going to know the most important part of your show build unique to this narrow podcasting method, profitable pod method. You're going to write out your freebie or lead magnet script. Also write out your opener script, and understand how to script and shape the body of your podcast regardless of if it's an interview or a solo episode. And also understand what to cover in the conclusion or outro, the end part of your show. The 6 parts of an episode script. We've got the intro, the introduction, moving into the freebie, the lead magnet plugged, so the promotion of your free thing, which helps people understand who you are, what you do, what the benefit is, and what they can get from you today in return for their email address, so you have that relationship. You've got the opener, so opening the episode, the core content, whether that's the interview or a solo show thought, whatever it might be, and your conclusion or closer, if you want to put that in, and then the outro, the very last thing people hear, and oftentimes possibly has the least amount of value, because once people get what they want, they stop listening. So that's why we front load value as much as possible. So here's an example of a show build guide. You may want to play with the order of a few things, but please be clear on one rule. And that rule is the rule of primacy and recency, that states that most of us best remember the first and the last thing we experience in a moment in time, like an event, say a meeting, a wedding, a training session, or in our case, a podcast. So here's where the narrow podcasting method will diverge from many other podcasts you have heard, and certainly what your competitors are doing if they have a podcast. This method is not about building likes and comments. It's about building your business. caveat, there's always a caveat. If you have a huge social media following, listen up. Social media platforms can go down and you can lose all your information and followers. That's much harder to do for people who are on your email list. So what do you want people to remember most of all? That's right, your website. That gives you the opportunity to capture their email address and show them what you have in a controlled way before they go back to Insta or TikTok. You can get their email before they go back onto Instagram and pine over their ex-girlfriends or whatever. So the Profitable Pod method is not about growing your podcast, right? It's about growing your business. So your podcast build should always focus on moving listeners to your website. You'll see there is a unique episode content as teaser and show content blocks here. The teaser is pulled from the main content and serves as a pattern interrupt, something really juicy from the middle of the show. It's short, it might be funny, might be controversial, or anything that makes the listener feel like they need to listen to this. I think the pull quote on the teaser is a really, really good idea. Also, it means that the predictable theme tune intro doesn't play right away. So let's take a look at these pre-recorded building blocks denoted by the kind of strip in the top right hand corner: intro, freebie, lead magnet, and outro. That freebie or lead magnet plug can come directly after your intro or even after your teaser, and can be a pre-recorded asset, and these days can be a dynamic pre-recorded asset, so you can change it without baking it into the episode audio. The dynamic ad feature on many podcast hosting platforms right now means that you can drop in a piece of audio and it will go in at any point in your podcast. So put a bookmark in that, but it means you can change what you're sending them to as your promotions, as your offers change. It should only last about 30 seconds, right? People don't want to hear you go on about your thing over and over again. They want to get to value, and it's in your interest to provide that. So to recap, that positions that freebie offer to get people over to your website either after your official or before your unique opening piece that goes into the core content. And as per the dynamic stuff, it can be changed every 90 days or so, or as often as you like, so long as you have a professional person running your podcast or you're prepared to learn how to work dynamic ads and understand your podcast host. As you know, that's something my team can help you with, so don't be overwhelmed by that. So here is a really quick example of a lead magnet script. And just a disclaimer, look, I'm not a woman, I'm not in agriculture, but this is based on a conversation I had once. I remember it well. So if that is you, if that is that woman I met in a podcast conferencing hall in LA a few years ago, please take this perfect lead magnet script. You can have it. So I'll just read it to you. And I'll read it to you because of the tone and the pace as well, right? Okay, so here goes. Before we get started, I have a gift for you. As a woman in agriculture, you'll understand all too well how underrepresented we are and how challenging it can be to be considered for new roles. So I've put together a short guide just for you. It's called 3 Ways to Make Your Resume Stand Out in Your Field. And it will help you get started on the road to finding your dream job in agriculture. You can get it right now over at mywebsite.com. So that was a few seconds, right? 30 seconds or so. There's a little bit of humor in there. There's a direct result. 3 ways to improve your resume, but I've put a kind of pun in there, probably because I'm British. But it's something people remember. And the last thing I put in there is the website.com rather than putting that website URL in the middle of that thing. So the last thing they hear, hopefully they're aligned. If they're speaking to women in agriculture, as that woman I met was, really challenged by the fact that there's not a lot of representation for them, And that was a conversation I remember having. So I kind of wrote that when I wrote my book. That's how that went down. Okay, part 3, the opener. You might want to sleep on it. And what I mean by that is once you've done an interview with somebody, particularly, this is interview based, is you might want to just let that conversation kind of sink in and think, right, what did I take away? Or you might want to just go straight in. There are AI tools, as you probably know, where you can feed that conversation in straight away, even before editing, and say, right, give me the 3 most salient points of this. And you can kind of create an opener. We spoke about A, B, and C. So if you want to know about that, here's my conversation with guest, that kind of thing. So this can come directly after your freebie lead magnet plug. Opens and closes with the name of the guest. So today I'm speaking to X. We talk about A, B, and C. Now here's my guest name, right? You can also create intrigue around a specific result and elicit an emotion. So-and-so is going to tell you how they overcome X challenge, right? You can create a pattern interrupt that makes people super curious and keeps them listening that way, right? Introduce something completely random. Like I always talk about a duck because I use a duck in one of my keynote talks, right? And people are kind of like, why is there a duck? This guy's a podcast person. I'll listen to this. To the point where I've been known to walk around various podcast conferences around the world, on both sides of the US and here in London, with a plastic duck. And guess what? People turn up because lots of people look like me broadly, and that gives me a differentiator. So the pattern interrupt is awesome. You can excite a listener with a hint of what's going to be covered and how it solves a specific problem, which hints at a value-packed episode. So just go all in with that stuff. Record your opener after you've done the interview, as I've said, and ask yourself, what are the 3 to 5 key points of the conversation? And what do you feel your listeners, who I hope are your target market, will find most useful about that conversation? So here's an example of an opening script. In this show, I speak with Jemima Smith, who shares a secret all brand design professionals should know, guaranteed to cut sales time in half compared with your competitors. She also discusses how learning to swim changed her entire business model and the 3-point system she uses to create loyalty from freelancers. So enjoy my conversation with the fantastic Jemima Smith. So break that down. There's a secret, there's a random pattern interrupt with swimming, and then there's a 3-point system to create loyalty from freelancers, which if you are somebody running a design agency might be exactly what you're struggling with. So part 4, your core content script body. Solo show, write out the entire script and practice it a couple of times before recording unless you are a super experienced speaker. Write out bullet points and use them to guide you, and so you're keeping things nice and concise. With an interview show, prepare questions. Be prepared for tangents, but try to bring the guest back to important points. You control the conversation, just like in a sales conversation. This stuff is about leading them to talk about stuff. And position yourself as a partner in the process. So you're not selling them, you are a peer. This is a peer-to-peer conversation. Don't let them expert all over you, right? Be a partner and really plan out what you're going to do and what you're going to say. The idea is that you have a unique conversation. This isn't where they get to do their I'm on a podcast speech, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay, part 5 is that conclusion or closer. You can choose to do one of these or not, but that would play before any official outro that you build, and that's around the outro obviously is going back to your website, all of that stuff. Reminds people of the key points, maybe your personal takeaways, tells listeners where they can find out more about the guest. You can also say thank you to the guest or anyone who made that interview possible, not because you're trying to create a Netflix credit sequence, but because you can tell that guest and other people who may have introduced you to that guest that you mention them on a podcast and engage them in that way to actually help build your business. So next steps, write a script for your lead magnet, your freebie. Make sure that you've created something super concise. Create your opener script. That will be for a episode specific thing. So that's a more than once thing. And what we've covered in this session, well, the most important parts of your show build. We've talked about your freebie, your lead magnet script. We've talked about episode opening scripts. And we've talked a bit about understanding how to shape the body of your show, regardless of if it's an interview or a solo show. And we've talked about also how to cover what to cover in the conclusion or the outro. Right, let's move on. How to evoke emotion in podcast guests and also listeners. By the end of this session, you will understand a few ways to evoke tone and emotion and consequently actions on the part of your guests and listeners. And we'll do that really by asking ourselves questions first. So think of the feeling that you're going to create behind each question you ask, and then think about the feelings that you want the guest to emote when answering a question. How do you want them to make your listeners feel? How do you want them to feel when they're answering this stuff? So what feelings also do you want your audience to pick up, right? They could be aspirational, sympathetic, empathetic. What feelings are you trying to get out? Backed by the actions that you want both the guest and the listener to take as a result of these kind of feelings that are being elicited. And really the answer is obviously use great questions and also music and sound design to back up that kind of sense of credibility and feel like, okay, they're in capable hands. Sound design works quite well here because it adds a kind of professional tone right underneath, literally. So what's a great question? Well, a great question is a thoughtful one, and it might pick out a moment or a memory, but it's backed by your research because you know who you're talking to and you know why you're talking to them, specifically how it's going to help your business and what kind of journey do they need to go on in a conversation with you to bring you closer to them as a guest. And obviously anything that helps your audience think this is a great interview. I need to be a part of this person's life or you as the podcaster, whatever it is, right? Think about that. One more thing that a good friend of mine taught me is memory, not thought. If I ask the same person what their memory of something was, they will give me a completely different answer. They'll tell me a story that I'm not aware of that will bring up emotion in them in a way that just what do they think about that as a bottom line, now that you've processed all that stuff based on your experience, what do you think about that? Well, you didn't ask them about their experience. And if you ask them about their experience, again, they'll come in with a formal answer possibly. If you ask them about their memory of what happened when or where they were, then they will become a much better storyteller than perhaps even they thought they were, because some people aren't as experienced speaking on podcasts as others. So memory is a really great trick. So next steps, if you want to, there's a tone and emotion download that you can grab. It will be somewhere in the links in the description, and you can print one of those out just as prep for any podcast interview you have. So what we've covered is to understand how to evoke tone and emotion and consequently create actions on the part of your guests and even your audience. How to record great podcast sound and gear considerations. So by the end of this session, you will have an insight into setting up your recording space while keeping in mind some key tips, including investing in gear for excellent sound quality, and you're going to have a fair idea of podcast tech in general. I've got to say, this is not about podcast tech, podcast gear. There are so many places you can go for that. I'm not a gear nerd particularly. It's not my thing, but it's an important part of understanding podcasting is the awareness of the equipment you use, and more about how to use it than what it is. But I'm giving you a really quick rundown because I guess it's a good starting point. And if you need specific tips on particular new models of microphone or whatever it might be, knock yourself out on Google or any other generic podcast expert kind of thing, because those guys love all that stuff. This is what I've got for you though. So tips for excellent sound quality. Maintain the right distance from your microphone. It's normally about 1 inch, and you need to make sure you keep that consistent. Identify if you have an end address or a side address microphone. You should be able to ask the person who sold it to you, or look on the box or Google, because you might not be speaking into the right place. If it's a side address microphone, there will be a side of the microphone you need to speak on that might not be obvious. Obviously, that means you need to set it up properly. You need to use a pop shield to stop plosives or a windshield. A plosive is where you get the letter P and other words like B, but mainly P and a few others, where if you say the alphabet with the palm of your hand in front of you and you get to the letter B and the letter P, a big blast of air will hit your hand in the way that A, for example, won't. So what happens is it hits the microphone and it causes like a thud and a boom. And what a pop shield or a windshield does is it disperses the air before the sound goes into the microphone, so it stops that booming, that pumping kind of sound that you get sometimes when you listen to recorded voices. And use headphones to help you monitor your own voice so you don't over speak. You don't need to talk in an outside voice when you're recording in a microphone, so you can actually save your voice doing that as well, and it will keep your tone and your vibe a bit more personal than public speaking if you've got your own voice coming back into your ears. As they say in show business, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. What really I'm trying to say is, if the podcast content and the strategy and all of this isn't in place, doesn't matter how beautiful your microphone is, there's no point in thinking that you're a great podcaster or buying really great gear and understanding how it all works and plugs in if your content isn't good. So don't be one of those people. This is Hamleys. At one point, it may have even been the world's biggest toy shop. It's on Regent Street in London, and you can get all the toys there. And again, another phrase I like to use sometimes is this one: all the gear, no idea. And that is something I would say, yeah, a lot of podcasters have all these amazing microphones and sets and studios and lighting when they're doing video stuff. Then they're really not focusing on making great content. So just be careful. Okay, let's look at some actual stuff now. On the left are Sennheiser HD25 headphones. They're like an industry standard classic. DJs use them. You'll see them everywhere. They're closed back, which means they're sort of solid on the outside, which means sound doesn't leak out of them. So that's pretty cool, pretty useful. Really sturdy. I've got a couple of pairs from Music Days that are over 20 years old and they're still going strong. And you can replace the wiring parts. You might be able to see if you look closely. There are kind of plugs in there. So they're a really good investment because they are modular and you can buy bits for them if bits break. Next are in-ear monitors. These are generic ones, so they're not molded to your ear. You can buy these from Shure. Shure makes some fantastic ones from, I think, the 535 SEs or something like that. They may have changed, but they're really good. And I can't remember what these white ones are called, but they're made by KOSS, KOSS, and they're really cheap. They're like £30 in the UK or $30 in the US, something like that. They're not, sound will leak if you've got really loud music coming in and back into your mic, but actually what they're amazing at is A, they sound unbelievable for the price, and B, you can't actually feel them on your head. The one thing that I'm not showing you, because you shouldn't be using them, are Bluetooth headphones. You want a wired connection for your headphones, so remember that. I talked to you about end address and side address microphones, so here's a quick diagram. End address microphone looks like this, and some others may look different, but you speak into the end of it, and then the side, you speak side on. There's another picture here of a end address microphone that looks different. Here it is, and it's on a boom arm. Now, a boom arm is an amazing thing. It clamps to your desk, and it means that you can have your microphone placed in a way that's comfortable for you to sit, and when you're sitting up nice and straight and you're speaking into a microphone, you can breathe and your tone of your voice is better and all of that stuff. So that's worth doing. So my microphone is on a boom arm, which means it's clamped to the end of my desk and it floats like an angle poise lamp, if you remember those things. And you can see it just. I've actually purposely not worn a black t-shirt so you can see the difference between the end of the mic, and what I'm wearing. And it's almost completely out of the screen. And I do that on purpose because I don't want people to be distracted if I'm making expressions, facial expressions, reacting on calls. I don't need this mic kind of coming in like people have on these kind of trendy podcast things. It's like, look, I've got an expensive mic. I don't want you to know that I've got a nice mic. I just want you to hear the results. And as a result of that, hear really good quality and clear sound from my voice. Now, if I take this windshield off, you can see the end of it a bit more. This helps also stop the plosives, but because I'm speaking across it diagonally, I'm also able to avoid plosives. And plosives, remember, are the big, the B's and definitely the P's that when you say the air comes out of your mouth and it hits the capsule. So if I say into the microphone, you'll get that horrible kind of crunch from the capsule of the microphone kind of moving. So if we talk across it, the air is going across rather than directly in. It's still picking up the sound of my voice. And if we have a windshield or a pop shield, this foam or the other thing that you'll see in a second disperses the air before the sound goes in. And the other good thing about the boom mic is it means that, okay, you can't see it in the picture as much, but if I sit back, I can bring the mic with me. If I stand up, because I've got a standing desk, that will move with me as well. I can see the screen clearly, and I've also got space underneath it to type on my keyboard if I need to. I've still got that desk space. I haven't got this thing, and that means, again, it stops me from hitting anything. And obviously if I hit this, you'll hear what kind of resonance happens. It's horrible. So that's really worth the investment. The arm is almost as important as the microphone. So yeah, I hope that helps, and I thought it'd be worth coming on video for that one. This is a pop shield, and a pop shield is something that you would clamp in front of that microphone there. There's a pop shield there, and that will help you with those plosives. You can also use, many microphones come with a foam windshield, which is like a little foam hat that goes over the top. And in this next picture, you'll see an unfoamed version on the left of the same microphone, an Audio Technica microphone. That's the AT2020. That is a side address microphone, and it's almost impossible to tell what side you're talking into, but it needs to be, I think, the one with a light on the side. So it's kind of odd. There you go. Windshield, no windshield. And then the middle one, RE20, Electro Voice RE20, probably about 4 times the money. Incredible microphone, but very heavy, and probably you don't need it. And then the classic podcast microphone is a Shure SM7B. And if you have a Shure SM7B, you might need a thing called a cloud lifter. and that will make everything, it will help raise the volume. What happens is your voice goes into the microphone, goes through the cloud lifter, which helps raise the volume if you need one. You may not, depending on the next thing. It goes down the cables, and then it goes into this thing called an audio interface. And that is what converts your voice into the digital file that becomes the audio, which then is changed into your podcast. That's one way of doing it. So you've got your mics, your cables into this device, which captures the sound and sends it into your computer. If you want, you can buy an all-in-one thing that just captures audio without using a computer. And if you've got multiple people in a room in real person, you might want to get one of these Rodecaster Pro things. And there's even more on the market now than there were the last time I looked at all this stuff. But it's pretty amazing. But you probably don't need it, especially if you're on your own. Here you go, this is what it looks like if you are in a room with real people, versus if you're on your own doing stuff online and recording online. This is probably a cheaper way of doing it. So you've got boom arm, pop shield, headphones, interface, which is the red thing made by Focusrite. Focusrite I really like, I have to say. They don't pay me, but every time I've had a problem with Focusrite gear, which is hardly ever, over about 25 years, they're always really supportive and they've always fixed it, which is why I've had Focusrite stuff forever. The other you can't polish a turd thing is having an amazing microphone in a terrible room that is got loads of hard surfaces. Like a bathroom would be the worst because it has all hard surfaces, loads of tiles, and your voice will echo around and the mic won't like that. So if you've got loads of soft furnishings and you've got a very acoustically dead room, you might be fine. But you also might want to invest in some acoustic tiles to stick on your walls, or heavy curtains or something like that. I'm going to tell you about one more piece of gear, which is an Amono sound capsule from Norway, because I have one and I've been working with these guys for a while when I've been recording podcasts out and about for clients. This thing is tiny, so I've taken a picture of the unit on the left and then you'll see it with the top off and you can see how small it is compared to that person's hand or that coffee cup. It's insane. It will store all the audio on it and it will send it when you're back in Wi-Fi connectivity into the cloud and you've got it done. The four tiny things on the left are microphones. They clip or they magnet onto people and you can record within 5 seconds, and it's got amazing ways of taking out sound. So I've recorded in hotel foyers, I've recorded outside on the street. It's bonkers. So if you need something portable and quick and you don't need camera, or you're going to be able to sync it up with camera, this thing is insane. But it is thousands of pounds or thousands of dollars. So you probably don't need it. But if you do, there is nothing better, and they're incredible people. So do check that out if that applies to what you're doing. Your next steps are to make any modifications to your recording setup that you need, or at least when you go to a studio, if you're doing it at someone else's place, you're going to know how to use the stuff or have a beginning of an idea. What we've covered in this session is to talk about how to set up your recording space while keeping in mind some of the key tips for excellent sound quality. Get the best gear you can afford for sure, but don't overspend, and don't mistake good gear for good content. And know that gear doesn't make up for a bad room environment either. How to choose your podcast guests. By the end of this session, you're going to understand what criteria a potential guest should meet before you invite them onto your podcast. You're going to decide on the ideal outcome you would like as a result of having someone on your show and be really clear about that. And you're going to capture this information as part of your POD-LATIONSHIP system or POD-LATIONSHIP cycle. More on that later on. So each guest you invite must meet one or more of the following criteria. Number one, be a potential prospect. That includes clients past and present, because you can use case studies from past clients, and obviously that may re-engage them. And you can use case studies from present clients, and that also may retain them. So it's a super strong way of doing it. And again, potentially other people who are neither at the moment, but be really careful. Make sure you're not going to be just pitching them your stuff. And again, I'll help you with the positioning of that later on. Number two, be a powerful referrer. This is kind of my favorite one, because these people are going to come on, they're going to share some value. You're going to make them feel fantastic about themselves. You're going to maybe open their eyes to a few things. And as a result, they are going to refer you to people. Number three, be a potential joint venture partner or a partner, right? These people could be one or more of all of these things. So a joint venture partner is somebody who's going to be serving the same target market, but delivering a slightly different result to you. So you share a client list essentially. So the important thing is to understand outcomes for each person on your list. So for example, a good outcome might be to talk about you to your target market. That guest is going to talk about you to your target market directly in some way. They might do a LinkedIn post or whatever it might be, and we're going to encourage them to do that, and I'll give you methods to do that later on as well. Better, they might actually directly refer somebody to you. They'll mention somebody to you. Ideally, then you're going to find a way to reach out and get the intro. A best kind of outcome is, of course, they're just going to say, hey, can I hire you? You're amazing. Or perhaps they're also going to be compelled to tell a very specific person to call you now because they can't believe they've just met someone, and that someone is you, and you can solve their colleague or their friend's burning need to get the result that you provide for your clients. I want to talk about fame for a little bit here, because I've worked with a lot of podcasters, and many of them are connected or know somebody. They have some sort of connection to a famous person, either randomly famous or a famous person in their business. If you have a lead on a famous person and you think it will boost your podcast ratings, you probably shouldn't have them on your show unless you are really close to them and you know they want to help you. Why? Because that isn't narrow podcasting that will grow your business. That's a vanity podcast. This is doing someone else's marketing for them, and they will likely come and give an interview they have given on 100 other podcasts. They're unlikely to share the episode they recorded with you to their list of people and their audience, and in most cases, it won't help you. So if you're connected to people who have a level of fame within your industry, wait for at least, I would say, 20 episodes before you interview them, and still be really clear on why they're going to be on your podcast. This is about controlling the narrative and controlling that conversation. And I'm going to talk later on how to create that unique interview. So hold that there, but do not fall into the fame game trap. Instead, create a card for each guest on your list. This is a kind of a container to keep all guest specific information and track it. You're going to write it down, what you know, what you've researched about your potential guest. Understand what's in it for me. Your good, better and best results for your business by getting them to appear on your show by being a guest. Understand obviously what's in it for them. Why would they consider being on your podcast? What is in it for them? So I like to use Trello. There's a free version, and this is a screenshot of a card. You can see here, Leanne Jones is a former CIO at D Corp, and I can see how we're connected. I've got links to her website, her socials. I can see on other notes she has 7 children and she loves to sail and she lives in Paris, and we're connected by June Smith. And so what's in it for me, best case scenario, is she's going to hire me and intro me to June Smith, who is perfect for my group program, for example. What's in it for her? What's in it for them? She hires me, right? It's a win-win situation, and also builds relationship capital by referring me to June Smith, because Leanne Jones really cares about what June Smith thinks of her. This is how humans work, right? So it's really good just to track those basic things on a card that's about this big, so you've got a nice overview. So next steps, set up a Trello board or similar if you have another kind of Asana or whatever it might be, Kanban system, with a template for each guest you potentially want to invite on your show, like a prospect pool of guests. And then we can move on. So what we've covered in this session so far is to understand what criteria a potential guest should meet before you invite them on your show. You're going to decide on the ideal outcome you would like as a result of having somebody on your show. This person knows that person, and my ideal outcome is that they introduce me to that person, because that person is connected to hundreds of people who could do with my services or my product or whatever. So make sure then that you capture all this information as part of your POD-LATIONSHIP cycle, POD-LATIONSHIP system, and I'm going to show you how to build that out later. So stay with me. Awesome. How to invite podcast guests so that they say yes. By the end of this session, you will create your own invite script template and your own mentionitis script templates. So, what a respectful invite looks like. Hi Santo, I host a podcast called Name About Topic for Target Market. Would you be open to talking about how you navigated the successful result they got? You can check out recent episodes in the link below. What do you think? Roberto, host of podcast name with link and then your business name. P.S. To lighten your content load, I'll be sure to get the produced episode show notes and episode art so you can share with your followers before it goes live or on the day it goes live. So here's the really important thing about that invite. Okay, you're talking about your podcast and the topic and the target market, which may pique their interest. But the thing that will pique their interest is when you ask them if they're open to talking about how they navigated a certain project they did or whatever it was. Because what that means is you're paying attention to them and their work. And that's really important, and that differentiates you from a spammer. So then you're also saying, you know, if you want to get a sense of the kind of work I'm doing and the kind of podcast I'm putting up, there's a link there. So A, this is what I do, who I help. I'd love you to join me because I know this cool thing about you. So clearly, I'm not just spamming you. And here's a link for credibility, right? Oh, and by the way, if you come on my podcast, P.S., I'm going to send you some really cool stuff that you can share. And that means you won't have to create any marketing content, and you'll have some news to share and you'll look cool, right? So that's fine. There's another kind of invite now, which I've called Mentionitis. And it's really good for cold outreach. So Mentionitis, here's an example email. Dear Renee, when you wrote about the power of water in chapter 3 of your latest book, it changed my life. Thank you. It had such an impact on me. And I spoke about that on this short podcast. Link here. What do you think? Your name and then your deets below it. So the thing with that is it works so well for cold outreach because people who don't know you, who you're really trying to get in with, probably don't care or don't know you, right? Because that's just how life is. Sad fact. But if you told somebody that you'd just spoken about them and then you'd recorded it on a podcast, their curiosity is going to get the better of them. And if you've recorded a short solo podcast about the power of water and how by drinking X amount a day, you can improve your health, and you've implemented that and it's brilliant and it's all down to this person that you've learnt about and you want to share it with your audience, that person is going to love you for it. And if they hear that you have a quality podcast produced that sounds awesome, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be really interested in telling you a little bit more. Oh, but you missed this thing. So you're going to open a dialogue. look at this thing, it says, what do you think? Or I'd love to know what you make of it, or whatever. It's not, come on my podcast. It's opening a dialogue. It's really, really important. And 9 times out of 10, those people will reply. So try mentionitis. Ask them if they'd be open to a conversation on your podcast to share more. If they reply to you, right? If they don't, ask them if they would be open to a conversation on your podcast to share more, because maybe they just don't assume you want to talk to them, right? So either way, that's what's going to happen. Be specific, polite, short, and demonstrate your authority through how you talk about them and how you kind of seed in what you're doing as well. Demonstrate you've already watched, listened, or read their stuff. Link to a URL where you've spoken about them. And one more thing. If someone mentions you in their stuff, send them an email inviting them onto your podcast to talk about that further, if that's the kind of person you want to be. Remember, they still need to meet that guest criteria. So, hi Avni, I read that you mentioned me in a blog post about podcasting. Thanks so much. Would you like to come on my podcast and tell me more about how you've applied the narrow podcasting method? Now, that's a great version for me, because what that means is someone's already promoting my stuff and they've used it. And that means case study, right? That means possibly I might identify a few things this person could do even better with, and they may hire me, they may refer me, or maybe they have a business where they partner with me. So it's the same old stuff. So next steps, create your standard invitation template and also create your mentionitis script template, which is a bit harder because it depends on who these high-level prospects are. But if they're cold and you don't know them, it's worth doing a solo episode on them. So what we've covered is the script and the mentionitis. Great, let's move on. How to make it easy for podcast guests to book an interview slot. By the end of this session, you will set up a private web page for guests to book their slot on your show. Now, in a post-pandemic world, you've probably got this down, but this is one of the things that people often miss, and I would love to just make sure that you've checked this off your list. So, first big tip is this. When you're interviewing people, set aside time during your week or your month to batch your podcast recording so you have a few in the can. Even if you're going weekly, you should be a few ahead. And if you're going to record in seasons, then of course, record those in advance. Set up a Calendly or Acuity link. There are other products available as well, and that will make it easy for your guests to book a slot. What those booking pieces of software do is you tell them the availability you have, and it will create a link for people to visit, and they can see what times you have available so you don't get any conflicts or anything like that. Here's a big thing. You might want to be available for high-profile guests when they have time to speak. So be careful how you use this tool. If it's for people who are already in your network, then it's 90% of the time it's appropriate. But there are people who want to play the game of they're in charge. And if it's a really high-profile guest, you probably don't want to use this straight away. You're going to want to ask them when they are available. If they ask for a booking link, that's absolutely perfect. That's when you can say, here are some times I'm available. If you can't find anything that suits, then please let me know. But here's a great starting point. Here are a few quick screenshots you can see. This is the kind of thing your potential guest will see when they click on your link. So there's a space for them to choose their time. In this case, this is a screenshot of something that happened on March the 11th, 2022 at 6 p.m. You've got first name, last name, phone number, email, and then a few more bits. So website address, links to socials, and then additional bits of information. Sometimes people like to make a point of saying, look, I don't want to talk about this thing. It might be an upcoming project that they have and they don't have legal permission to talk about it. It might be an awkward personal thing that people might be talking about, but they're not interested in talking about it on your show. So this gives people a really good way of helping you ask the right questions as well. So choose your software, Calendly or Acuity. There's a ton of others. They may be included in some subscriptions you've got already. I certainly know Microsoft Teams has a version of this as well that's free of charge, and you can go ahead and create your automated booking form. Once you've done that, ideally you want to embed it inside your website for guests to book their slot, which means that you have a yourwebsite.com/podcast guest or /book episode or whatever URL you might need. It's not something you're going to see publicly on your website. It's going to be that private link. It's going to have a call to action to book now. It's going to have details about the podcast. You're going to want to put where to find your podcast and links to past interviews if you're already live, or add that very soon after you've done this. You might want to have a list of questions you typically ask, and if you do have a signature question, then you can put that on there, like a very specific question you ask all your guests. It's kind of cool to have a welcome video so people can put a face to a name and also have that experience of tone. Another reminder, a clear call to action to book now. So 2 buttons, and I'm going to show you an example right now of one. Okay, so here's a mock-up of a booking page. There's a lot on it. Yours doesn't necessarily need to be this long, but it covers all bases. Simple call to action. Before we press record on your podcast name, if you've not scheduled yet, book your interview now. So that button will open into that calendar thing that you've installed. About the podcast, thanks for agreeing to be on it. This is what you've got in common. This is why I've invited you. This isn't just any old podcast. The show will normally be live. You know when it will be live. We're going to record using this software. I'm going to send you a link in the confirmation email when you book. Why now? Like, why am I asking you to do this? Something there. Where to find the podcast? You can put a few recent links to things. Subscription links to different platforms which your podcast host should provide you, plus YouTube if that's something you're doing. What you can expect from the interview, how long a time commitment it is, all of that stuff. You might want to preview, or you might not want to preview questions so that they can have a little bit of a think about at least what they're going to start with. But again, you don't want them to be too TED talky all over your podcast, for a want of a better thing. And finally, I'll ask you this: getting the best sound. I'll send you a quick note ahead of our call to make sure we get the best sound. There's an individual email about that just lets people know not to use Bluetooth headphones and all of that stuff. We'll probably get to that later. And then what else is important? In red here, but let me know if there's anything you particularly want to talk about or we need to avoid talking about in advance, right? You don't want to embarrass anyone, do any gotcha style podcasting. It's not what this is about. Again, reiterates there's going to be a space in the booking form for your bio, websites, all of that stuff, so I can create social media assets and send them out to you as well. And then finally, there's a link to your phone number just in case there's tech issues on either side, if you're doing this remotely, which you probably are. And then finally, another link to book the interview. So if they're a bit not quite sure and they don't press at the top, you've got the callback CTA at the bottom of the page here. Okay, so next steps: set up that private web page for guests to book their slot on your show. So /pod book or /name of your show booking, something private. Make sure it's private. Set up that booking system, whether it's Acuity, Calendly, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is, and embed that booking code onto that page into your site so it links to the button, which I just showed you. And look, remember to keep it human, because some of these people don't like using booking systems. Some of these people like to tell you when they're available, and depending on how valuable they might be to you, you're going to want to be a bit flexible sometimes. So what we've covered in this session is how to set up a private web page for guests to book a slot on your show. How to prepare your podcast guests. So by the end of this session, you're going to have written your tech prep email or web page and created a checklist for your own sound check session. So what this is about is sending out an email before the recording, letting them know what to expect so you get the best quality sound and everything goes to plan. So it's a really good idea to sound check on the day of recording. Don't forget to record. Use a post-it or set up your software to auto-record. I always, to this day, years and years down the line, write a big record in pencil on my notepad in front of me when I'm recording something, because it's so easy to forget. It's like one of those things that every podcaster has done and will do once. They'll forget to record, maybe more than once, but please, that's the main thing for you, is not to actually forget to press record. Asking innocuous questions during the sound check to put your guests at ease. A couple of reasons for that. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of chit chat while you're doing the thing, but you don't want them spilling the really great content while you're just adjusting sound levels and all of that stuff. So how was your morning? How was your day? What did you have for breakfast? I'm just trying to get a sense of sound levels. We're not actually recording the stuff yet, and I don't want you to tell me too much already. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. If you use Zoom to record your show, set it up so that it records individual audio for each participant, which basically means you and your guests, or maybe multiple guests if you've set it up that way. If you use other recording software, always make sure that you're capturing separate audio files from each person. It's not compressing everything together. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like. You can see at the top, I'm saving it to my desktop, and I've ticked where that black arrow is to record a separate audio file for each participant. That's what I'm talking about. So, tips for recording super high value guests, which I'm sure they all are. Ask their assistant if they have one to set up QuickTime and record their audio locally if they can. So if they can take a recording from their microphone in the location they're in, then any internet issues where there might be a break in signal can be fixed in post. So it's like an insurance recording. And you can do the same on your side as well. Give yourself and your guests about half an hour before the interview to chill out and check out sound levels and recording. You might not always get that 30 minutes, but certainly give yourself that 30 minutes. Don't be in meetings right up until the time you're about to record a podcast. I don't recommend that. Remember, you can leave notes for your podcast editor if you use one, and use claps during the interview if you're outsourcing your editing to a professional team. Frankly, if you're doing it yourself, this is a really good thing. So when you record audio, it looks like this on the screen. There's these waveforms, right? And you can see this first arrow says normal speech. So let's say that's the level of normal talking. If you clap, you get that short spike in the middle. So what happens is if you or you or you say something, or someone says something that is a mistake or they want to redo, or even if you want to mark it as an interesting point, you can say clap. There you go. That was a point where you might want to highlight it. Super useful thing. This is where the clapper boards come from, right? They roll sound and they clap, and then they line it up with a picture. So next steps: write that tech prep email, create a checklist of questions and things to do during your sound check to keep it kind of chilled. That's it. What we've covered in this session. Write that tech prep email or web page. Of course, you can host the copy on a web page if that's easier for you, and create that checklist for your sound check session to make sure everything's going. So by the time you press record, you're good to go. Please do not forget to press record. Okay, how to make the most of your interviews on other podcasts. By the end of this session, you're going to set a template to host your freebie or special offer for when you're a guest on other people's shows. Don't say yes to everything. Only say yes to shows that are aligned with your business goals and your target market, and to shows with the same quality production values as your own show. So if you create a landing page, you can host a freebie or a special offer on that page. It could be a checklist, it could be a download, it could be something you're already offering on the homepage of your website. But if it's / name of the other person's show, then that's going to help you track the success of being on that person's show. So keep the URL simple, yourwebsite.com/name of the other person or the other person's podcast. So next steps, set up that landing page. And what we've covered in this session, setting up a template to host a freebie special offer when you're a guest on other people's shows. Makes the most of your time, gets their list onto your list and all that good stuff. So this is a really, really good and fairly quick thing you can do to make the most out of your time when you are going to show up on someone else's show. How to avoid podcast editing pain. By the end of this session, you will understand how to bring listeners into the conversation, even if you already have a shared history with the guest or the subject matter is too technical, and create a list of backup questions to ask a guest in case you weren't able to do enough research or there is a lull in conversation. So guests you know versus guests you don't. With ones you know, you feel comfortable with them, which is great. They're low hanging fruit to book. Yeah, they're already on your side. They want to help you. But the problem is you can come across as too chummy and too inside baseball, which might push the listeners away versus asking questions your listeners actually want answers to. So be really clear about that in your planning. And how are you going to bring your listeners into the conversation? Well, if you already know the guest, you can bring them in by sharing your unique shared experience. That might be a question like, what is your memory of how we met? It's a really nice way to frame your relationship and bring people in to that, as long as it's not too long. If a guest uses lots of jargon, use a question like, for those who might not be familiar with subject matter, technical term or location, how would you explain or describe it? I've spent quite a long time working with both doctors and scientists and astronauts, and all of those kinds of people use a lot of acronyms. So just a gentle nod to say, what is a AGT 6420, whatever, right? Because people do revert to their technical expertise and they don't mean to. So be prepared to advocate for your audience in that case. And be prepared with questions to fill the conversation if needed. So how has your business or skill changed as you've evolved or grown over time? That's always an interesting one. How do you know what to do next? How do you make decisions? What sort of success have you seen after doing the thing that you do or taking that action? What are the easily avoidable mistakes you see people make in your area of business? And what's worth spending time on? What can and should be delegated? What was the most interesting thing you've seen in that case? What are your favourite resources? Where do you go to get your information? What sort of things have surprised you? What's next for you? It's a fantastic ending question. What's the best way to get started in your industry? So just a few questions there. So next steps, create your list of fail-safe questions to ask. Feel free to have those. And what we've covered in this session is to understand how to bring listeners into the conversation, even if you already have that shared history with the guest or subject matter is too technical. How to create your 20-second podcast episode teaser. By the end of this session, you will understand how to create that 20-second teaser for each episode you produce. What's usually edited out by your podcast production company like the one I run? The waffle around lost trains of thoughts, going off on tangents that aren't related. Guests can do that. You might do that. Be careful, I'm going off on a waffle right now. Dead air. Dead air is the space probably when people are thinking about what they're going to say or you're thinking about what's going to be asked. It's a perfectly natural thing to have in a normal conversation, but listening back to it, not so enjoyable. So those pieces of air that are silent can be removed. Filler words and verbal clutter. Yeah, I know, you know how it is. Yeah, just filler words that don't really say anything, even though people keep going on around, the same stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah, that kind of thing. Filler words, completely pointless, boring, and don't bother with it. Also coughs and splutters and sneezes, clicking, ticking, squelching mouth sounds. So get rid of all that stuff. That has to go. And then you can think about creating your 20-second teaser, because this is what your listeners hear first. It's always created last. It's a unique clip that's pulled from the episode, from your conversation, and it should feature your guest's voice if you have a guest 9 times out of 10, because this is the person you're building the relationship with in the narrow podcasting, profitable pod method way. It makes people want to lean in and listen to the rest of the episode, which means it can be funny, it can be surprising, it can be controversial. And it only needs to be 10 to 30 seconds long. So the way to do that is make a note of any moments that would be good for a teaser when interviewing your guest, and send that timestamp for your editor. Just write, it was at 4 minutes, 32 seconds. Karen said she couldn't believe she found out it was a vicar. You know, that kind of thing that is just maybe a little bit unexpected. So make notes of those. Maybe you go back and listen and you think, wow, there were 3 really salient points here. You can even these days use AI to ask what were the remarkable, unusual, different things about that particular conversation. There's various tools you can use for that as well. So what we've covered in this session, we've talked about the removal of sounds that you don't need and lost trains of thought and all the things that you will not want in a teaser for an episode, and then also thinking about how you can pull a fantastic quote for the front end of your episode. How to get more from your podcast content. By the end of this session, you will know what to do if you have more than 1 hour of content or you miss a recording or a publishing deadline. You're going to know when it makes sense to republish an episode, as well as what frequency and what cadence to follow in terms of production, and understand how to create more value from high-profile guest interviews that you have managed to secure. So what if you have more than 1 hour of content? Split it up into 2 parts. There is some signpost admin to do here. So this is the first episode of 2 episodes, etc. Bit of admin, and you can let listeners know in the opener of part 2 if they should listen to part 1 first, etc. And then at the end of part 1, tease part 2, if that makes sense. So you're also going to want to let them know they can listen to part 1 at the top of episode 2. Anyway, hopefully you get my point here. What if you miss a recording or publishing deadline? Well, you can republish an older show. You can record a new opening section if you'd like as well, so that you can explain the situation to listeners and provide context to the old show. If you have time, I'd suggest that. So what you can say is you can do your own small solo spot that says, "Hi, it's Toby, and today I'm republishing my episode about this subject with this guest that was fantastic. It came out 6 months ago now, and I know a lot more of you have joined since then. It's a fantastic start. If you're looking to do X or get X result, enjoy my conversation with guest name." And then you can put that bit of audio in and republish it. Of course, you can republish on purpose, right? If you have an old episode that covers something significant and newsworthy happening in your industry, an example could be, I spoke to Robbie this time last year about how he prepared himself to speak online at the last minute due to flight restrictions in his country. This is still a relevant topic for so many of us, so I hope you enjoy this episode from the archives. Something like that. Why publish weekly? Well, it shows your reliability and commitment. And it creates a habit in your listener who creates space weekly in their diary, in their calendar, to listen to you at the same time each week. When I take my dog for a walk on Wednesday afternoon, that's when I listen to you. Oh, that podcast is my drop the kids off swimming and put my headphones on so I don't have to hear them screaming. Whatever it might be. Nothing is more valuable than owning a piece of your listeners' week on a regular basis. So this isn't specifically about getting clients and creating relationships with guests, but it is about really starting to foster a relationship with the people who you don't know yet, who we're trying to get into your world. What is a cadence? Well, a cadence is about intervals, a musical term, and you can alternate between short solo episodes with longer guest interviews. I really like that cadence. I like that rhythm because you're only committing to 2 interviews a month on average and 2 short solo episodes, kind of blogs if you like, and that really helps with the time cost and the organisation. The reason why solo episodes help as well is for the reasons that Michael Port talks about. People, right? Listeners will only invest amounts of time with you in proportion to the amount of trust you've earned. So once you have more trust, your solo episodes can potentially get longer. But the idea is that people come over, they listen to an interview because somebody they know is being interviewed on this podcast. Maybe they've got a link from that person, that guest. So there's a kind of passive referral over. They fall in love with you. They love the kinds of questions you ask, and they start to check out your earlier stuff. They start to check out your solo episodes because they like your vibe, for want of a better word. So how often should you record? Well, once your launch is done, you can set up a ritual of recording monthly or even once every 2 months if you like. So remember that batch record comes up again and again. And how can you get more value from your episodes? Create follow-up, companion, after-party episodes, especially if you have well-known guests on your show. It gives even more meat from the bone. You can create more awareness and more traffic for your guests without taking up more of their time. So, for example, 5 things I discovered from this guest about this topic. So that guest is still the star of the show and they don't even need to be on your podcast. Isn't that an amazing thing? It makes your guest think, you did an episode about me as well as with me. And that is meat from the podcast bone, my friends. So what we've covered in this session: know what to do if you have more than 1 hour of content or miss a recording or publishing deadline. Know when it makes sense to republish an episode as well as what frequency and cadence to follow. And understand how to create more value from those high profile guests you secure by using the after party strategy. Welcome to phase 3 of the Profitable Pod Method skill sessions called post-production. In this phase, there are 10 sessions, all focused on how to get the maximum value from your podcast by using it as an asset to build and develop relationships for your business. This is the stuff you won't find anywhere else, but remember, it only works when you have your foundations in place. Of course, if you'd like support with planning, positioning, or production for your podcast, remember you can get in touch with me, Toby Goodman, over at narrowpodcasting.com. How to create shareable and searchable assets for your podcast episodes. By the end of this session, you will be able to list the shareable assets that need or can be created for each episode that you produce, and create templates and processes to produce these shareable assets for each episode, and decide who will do what. Remember, your episode is about your guest first when it comes to narrow podcasting, the Profitable Pod method. This is about using your podcast to grow your business, not growing a podcast for the sake of it. And so that means we need to create assets that create a great experience for your guests. What you do not want to do is announce your guest before you've actually recorded them, because sometimes they cancel, don't end up rescheduling, or whatever happens. So don't be too previous. Remember, you want to spotlight their what's in it for me. So don't make it all about you. Try and make it about both of you maybe, but certainly you want to make them the star of the show. Here are 4 shareable assets that you can create for each episode. This is absolutely crucial. Custom artwork for each episode, normally with their face, if it's a guest, of course, or your face, if it's a solo show, with a clear title, and the name of your podcast, of course, as well. You need show notes for each episode, ideally, an episode headline, and 3 social media posts is incredible if you can do that. And these days we're talking about reels and shorts and all sorts of other things as well. So here are 3 media post ideas for each episode that you can get started with, not too overwhelming. Episode art, that, as I just said, headshot of your guests, plus the title of your episode. Quote from the episode, it should say, not show. Quote from the episode, so a poignant thing that your guest has said. An audiogram with a 20-second audio clip of the podcast. You can normally see like a waveform playing as well. No video, but these days, very, very easy to capture short video. Winston Churchill once said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Back during the pandemic, I created a podcast called Crisis Cast 2020, and it was a way for me to meet and connect with different leaders in all sorts of different places around the world. Here's an example of what the album art looked like, and here's an example of what episode art looked like, and here's an example of what a quote post looks like. So creating your show notes, there's quite a lot to consider here, and I'm going to share an example with you too. Upload these to your hosting platform and unique episode blog page for each episode. So you only create them once, but you send them to 2 places. Your show notes should be easy to read and focus on SEO, that's search engine optimization, in order to get indexed to be found high up in search engine rankings, basically Google at this point. And think about what your ideal customer would search for on Google when you're writing things. How to X, when should I Y, like those things are phrases. Use a website called Answer the Public to get a good idea of what search terms people are using in and around your industry. What to include in your show notes? Well, your podcast title, episode number, and episode title. Short bio of your guest, if you have one. An episode description, so the overview of what was talked about, and you can talk about that in benefit-driven language. In this episode, you will discover, right? Episode bullets, so summary of key talking points. Again, use that word discover or something along those lines. Quotable quotes, so words from the guest either sprinkled throughout or pulled together. And then how to find out more about your guest. Links to products, services, resources, either mentioned by the guest of other people, by you, or their own. And a clear call to action, how the listener can connect with you or your product or your service at the end. So we want to make sure that we close with you, right? Remember that primacy and recency, really, really important. So that call to action at the end, encourage sharing, liking, subscribing as well. But we want people to come and find out and visit you. Remember, people that love your stuff on social media might never be your clients. So let's put your offer front and center. Here's an example of Kathy Sullivan Explores, episode 45 show notes. You can see the podcast player embedded at the top. You can see the guest's artwork over there on the right and an intro about Jenny Britton, her guest. You can see a quote in red, and then as you scroll down, you can see this week on with all the bullets, all the different things that are spoken about. You've got some favourite quotes, some additional things from the guests, and then you've got links to Jenny that then below that, which I haven't captured, is then links back to the lead magnet and other things around Kathy's stuff. So have a look at that as a good sense of flow. So your next step, create the template for your episode art and quote. I like Canva. It's easy, it's quick. Even if you're not going to do your design, do that initial stuff. As I've said in other artwork-based sections, you can do some brainstorming in Canva to get a flavor. If you've already got your brand guidelines, you should be set, and you want to delegate this as soon as possible. This is not something you should probably be doing, but if you've got the templates, at least it can be quick. You can set up audio templates in an app called Wave, but also I think Canva now do that too. There's a ton of different things. Headline is a fantastic app run by a really great company out of New York. So there's a lot of options these days. And create your show notes template, both in Google Docs or Word, and also on your blog, just to make sure you've got it there and you've got that framework that you just fill in as you go. And then you can iterate, and you can actually teach GPT or any other AI tool you may have how to do that from the transcript, and then you can polish it from there. Create a process to build these assets and decide who you can outsource these to. This might be all delegation, but it's still worth knowing what you want and what is possible before you outsource to a company like mine. What we've covered in this session talks about listing the shareable assets that need to be created for each episode that you produce. At this point, it's basically hundreds per episode could be created, so it's up to you to decide what ones are most important, but do not skimp on good show notes and good episode artwork. And create templates and processes to produce these assets for each episode if you have capacity, or delegate it out to a good production company like the one I run. And of course, decide who will do what. So maybe you do some of these things and somebody else does others. If you're in a large organization with a marketing team, etc., make sure that you're not doing fun artworky things when you could be serving your clients. Even though it's fun, you don't necessarily need to do it. How to get more organic traffic for your podcast. By the end of this session, you're going to understand how to leverage the power of YouTube to rank for SEO and be able to upload your podcast to YouTube. Now, YouTube, as far as I know, still at this point of recording, is the world's second largest search engine after Google. YouTube results show up on the first page of a Google search often, and obviously when people type in video results as well. This might be very important if what you do and your expertise has something related to anything visual, because the way people go to YouTube is with intent, putting how to fix this thing or how to improve this thing. Might be a physical exercise thing, it might be repairing a piece of machinery, whatever it is, people go with intent. So if there's a visual component to what you do, YouTube obviously shouldn't really be ignored. And you can use your podcast, you can host podcast video on there if you want to. We haven't really spoken about video skills specifically, but YouTube, either way, in its most basic form, can still be leveraged, and I'll show you how, even if it's just with an audio podcast. Another reason to post your podcast to YouTube, it increases accessibility, as followers can read along if you've got subtitles instead of listening to the content. And again, fairly easy to put subtitles on at this point. So how are you going to put your podcast up onto YouTube? Well, you need to strip out the audio that you have, or get your production company to do that, and include it in an MP4. You can do it on Canva these days, and you can do it on a ton of other programs. Very, very easy. And then put the episode art up as a picture. Just change the ratio, so 16:9, and leave a third at the bottom for subtitles. You can use the automatic transcription or subtitling function inside YouTube, or you can pay for human transcription by using rev.com or trint.com and upload what's called the SRT file. You can do it that way. You can also tweak stuff. You can also probably at this point find an AI bot to load your audio in, have it transcribed automatically, and then just tweak any errors, right? You do want to give it a cursory read over if you're using any automated thing. And then finally, load those show notes into the description area of the YouTube video. What you end up getting then is your episode art, like this one with my friend Brady, which I did years and years ago, and having a YouTube channel full of your podcasts. And so if people are looking at certain things on YouTube, they'll find you. They won't get any video maybe if you've not gone for that, but they will find you. And then if your show description and your notes are in the description of that YouTube video, they're going to move over to your website, your environment, and get in your world in a more meaningful way. So next steps, create a template for your episode art for YouTube. again on Canva is perfect. Remember to leave that space at the bottom for subtitles. Decide if you're going to use automatic transcription subtitling function inside YouTube or pay somebody for real transcription and have that SRT file. Again, all of this stuff can be done by a professional production company like mine, or you can decide to do elements of this depending on where you're at. And then create your YouTube upload process, document it, and decide who will do what, so that even if you're doing all of these pieces at the moment, it's something you have an SOP for and you can delegate it as soon as possible. So what we've covered in this session is to understand to how to leverage the power of YouTube, rank for SEO, be able to upload your podcast to your YouTube. Also, just to make sure that you know at this point in time, it's 2025, having a YouTube channel is free. So that is something you should be able to set up as well. And I appreciate that wasn't explicitly put in this segment. How to ensure your podcast is safe and where it needs to be. This segment is about podcast hosting. So let's be really clear about that, because this is really important. By the end of this session, you will understand the importance of hosting and sign up with a reputed hosting company if you have not already done so, and get clear on podcast networks and what to look out for, because they're different things. So what is hosting? Well, hosting is the tech that turns your audio files into actual podcasts by creating something called a unique RSS feed, and it will send the content, your audio, your different episodes, to all the places podcasts can be found, whether that's Spotify or Apple or wherever else people listen to podcasts. And without having proper hosting and an RSS feed, you don't have a podcast. A YouTube video with you sitting around a table with microphones is not a podcast, because it's not going to show up in podcast players, right? So it's not the same thing. And the idea really is that audio is much easier and quicker to do than video. So I'm very much still, even now, an audio first person. And once set up, you get embed codes, so like a tiny piece of code for each episode, and you can put that in that blog page, and it shows up as a player so that listeners can hear your podcast on your website in addition to all of those major podcast players. Why you must invest in podcast hosting. It means that you own your podcast and you can use your content anywhere you choose. Now, be careful of free hosting companies, because they can hijack your content and they can fill it with ads and all sorts of other content to promote their own agenda or make money from their advertisers exclusively. Now, that's fine if you've got a podcast for fun and you don't really care, but if you've got a business that you're trying to promote healthy eating and you find out that your hosting company, your free hosting company, has put adverts for a burger company all over it, for example, it's not really going to work for you. So it's worth investing money. At this point, good podcast hosting costs between $10 to $20 a month, or similar, 10 to 20 UK pounds a month, 10 to 20 euros a month, kind of around that. Frankly, if you're not interested in investing that sort of money in your business at this point, I can't help you. And of course, when you go with free hosting, they may actually own that RSS feed, which means they own your stuff. They own your IP. So now let's talk about podcast networks. These are not the same as hosting companies. You can build networks on good hosting companies, for example. A good podcast network is a group of individual podcast shows with a common interest. They make money by cross-promoting each other and sharing the same advertising space. Some host live in-person events, and a good podcast network generally creates that credibility and community and referrals and builds an audience and customers fast. So if you're in a network of like-minded professionals, or you serve a like-minded target market, then it might be worth being in a podcast network, or it might be worth looking in the future and thinking, right, if I set up my hero podcast about X subject, then it means that these people who refer me all the time, who have kind of partner businesses, may want to come in on my podcast network later. And so a rising tide lifts all ships. What bad podcast networks are? Well, there are lots of these about, and so that's why I wanted to kind of call these out, right? A lot of people are making this nefarious, join our podcast network, pay us just this much money, we'll do the production, or maybe we won't even do the production, and you can be part of a network, you can be in our club, and it doesn't make sense. So a bad podcast network has only one goal, and it's to use other people's content to make money for themselves. And there's no clear theme to their shows, and they bookend each show with the name of their network with the intention of getting the listeners over to their website, and they put their ads on it and all of that stuff. I would say 99% of my clients shouldn't be in podcast networks. They shouldn't entertain that. They should be focusing on their business. But do not get fooled by cheap production or cheap hosting or hosting included. You know, it's only $20 a month or whatever. Do not get involved in a network until you're absolutely clear why you're doing it and it serves your business. So next steps, make sure that you sign up, if you haven't already, with a reputed hosting company. If you haven't already done so, you'll be paying some money for it and you will own your RSS feed. Make sure that is the case. If you want to contact me about good podcast hosting companies, then feel free to ping me over on LinkedIn. What we've covered in this session, well, understanding the importance of hosting and signing up with a reputed hosting company if you haven't already done so, and getting clear on podcast networks, what to look for and what to look out for. Be careful with podcast networks. You have been warned. How to strengthen your relationship with your podcast guests. By the end of this session, you'll understand how to stay top of mind and take your relationship with your guests to the next stage without being pushy, salesy, or sleazy. This is probably the most valuable tool in the entire Profitable Pod Method skills session. So let's get started. How to grow your authority. Well, number one, be excellent at what you do. Don't be a con artist. Just be good at what you do. If you've already got a skill, you've got a business that's working really well, you're in great shape. Number two, what most people who are very good at what they do don't do. Make people aware you're excellent. And number three, stay top of mind by being consistent with your networking. So keep going. Keep telling people you are not anyone else's number one priority. So make sure you keep showing up. So let's talk about emails. Well, pushy and bad networking looks like this. Hi, Jane, you good? I'm working on my new project. And you can buy my book and you can listen to my podcast or you can buy my course. Thanks. Send something like that. Clearly, the you good doesn't make any difference and you're just telling people how great you are and what you're doing. You don't want to do that. Don't be false. People see through it. Good networking starts with a step. Hi, Anna. Turns out it's been 3 months since we spoke. How are you doing? Toby. This is an exact email that I wrote to somebody called Anna. Bide your time and respect other people's. Tucky Moore talks about SPUR emails. That stands for short, personal, expecting a response. I like to just tweak it slightly and put another S in there. Short, specific, personal, and expecting a response is another way. Now, like I said, I sent this exact email and I got this exact reply. Toby, great to hear from you. Family all good. I've just been speaking with a client. I think you can help him. Do you have space? Can I make an intro? That literally has happened. And all I've done, I've realized I haven't spoken to her for 3 months and I've touched base. And that was the result. And that did result in a significant client. So staying top of mind. Have up to 90 people in your network to keep in touch with. You've probably got much, much more than that. But look at the most powerful 90 and touch base every 3 months or so. Just find out how people are doing because people's situation changes. And don't show up thinking about pitching. Just catch up and find out where they are because they may be in a different job. They may be in a different situation. They're probably not going to be someone that hires you, but stay top of mind because if you've changed something, if you've improved something, they may have met someone in the last 3 months that they can introduce you to. Use your personal email to connect with them. So don't go for some new jazzy business email that's going to get lost in spam. And frankly, show up and ask them how you can support them if there's anything they need help with. Don't expect it to be your thing, but just know that you're a well-networked person and that you'd be happy to introduce them to somebody in your network too. So if you're an authority in your market and you're top of mind, your business is going to grow. It's pretty obvious when you think about it. So the follow-up strategy to stay top of mind. Number one, when someone has been on your podcast, send them an email, thank them for their time. Number two, let them know when the podcast is about to go live and give them that episode art that makes them look cool, gives them that shareable asset. Number three, let them know how that show has been received the week or week after it's gone out, and send them another asset like a piece of quote art or something additional. Email 4, maybe week 4, let them know you still think of them often, and further prove value with intros or maybe an additional audiogram or something extra that you can give them. So you're just giving, leading with a gift. So email one example. Thanks for your time. Dear Name, thanks so much for your time just now. I'll send you links and a few social media assets as soon as my team has made them up. Warmest, Your Name. P.S. Would you like to schedule a time to connect about something you mentioned in the post-coital pod moment? How's 2 p.m. Eastern next Wednesday? Now, post-coital pod is a special moment. It's the power to change the listening you are speaking into. The post-coital moment is about the moment just after you've finished your podcast recording. What do they say? Almost every single time that guest says, "How was I? Did you get everything you need?" And that's the moment where their listening position from who is this person or what am I going to say? I hope everything's okay. They're a bit more open to listening to what you've got going on. And in that moment, if you're really, really listening hard to what they've said during the interview and during the conversation, you might say, "Oh, I noticed you were looking for a new graphic designer. Would you like me to make an intro to someone in my network?" This isn't about selling, but they might reveal a challenge that they're having where you might say, "Would you like some help with that?" Something I help my clients with all the time. Okay, email 2, your podcast is live. So the day or the day before it goes live, your podcast interview goes live tomorrow. Thanks so much for your time. Your show goes live here. Here's the link, yourwebsite.com/podcast/name of episode with name of guest. Please note this page will only go live at the above time. Can't wait to hear what you think. P.S. To help lighten your content load, keep your followers up to date, here's some episode art for you to share. Please tag me on the socials when you post. That'd be really helpful. Thanks. Email 3. Feedback on your episode. Hi, Name. Thanks again for your time on the podcast. Your episode's been live for a week. Feedback's been fantastic. I love what you said about insert relevant topic. This is the short, specific stuff. In fact, I thought it was so poignant, I had another quote made up. See attached that you can share. Oh, by the way, how are things going with your latest project? P.S. The full link to your episode and show notes is here. Right, so again, a callback to that. And just one question. How are things going with your latest project? Number 4, a gift. Hi, can you believe a month has flown by since your show went live? Team's created an audio post or a reel or whatever it might be for your episode, and I thought you should have it too. There's nothing like the sound of the human voice to cut through the noise out there when it comes to social media. P.S. Is there anyone I've spoken to on the podcast before or since your episode you'd like an intro to? If so, I'd be more than happy to connect you to the podcast alumni. You can find the full list over at, and this is your website and the whole thing. So this is the alumni play. It's really, really powerful. People can look back at the catalogue of people you've interviewed, the archive of people you've interviewed, and they say, "Do you know what? I would love to meet Jane Smith, because Jane Smith is an accountant and I've been looking for an accountant that understands my industry for a long time. Could you make an intro?" They might not reveal why, but they might say, "Oh, I'm maybe thinking about collaboration." So then you have to do the double opt-in. You have to ask Jane if she's open to an intro. So you don't just want to start networking people together willy-nilly, as we say over here. But yeah, all these are really strong because, again, it keeps you top of mind. If you're not selling your thing, but you're connecting people, it's really, really valuable. So next steps, create that follow-up strategy and add it to your Trello, your project board. So this is after your pool of prospects of possible guests all the way through to episode booked to booked and all of that stuff. And then Once that episode has been published, you move the card across to published, and then you move it across to that follow-up sequence that you're going to create using these emails. So you've understood how to stay top of mind and take your relationship with your guest to the next stage without being pushy, salesy or sleazy. It just means stay in touch with them. You've done some work together. They've given you their time, and you have a duty of care, if you care about this relationship, to follow up and keep giving. Don't just take their time. Give them, show them the result that you created together, that work you created together, that podcast episode. Podcast alumni connection strategy. I just went over this. I'm just going to go over it again because it's a really, really big one. So by the end of this session, you're going to understand how you can become a connector within your network in order to establish your authority. You should never expect or do this for a referral fee. This is the way of some podcasts, but it is not the narrow podcasting, profitable pod way. In fact, let me be clear, at no point is it cool to charge people to be on your podcast. Down the line, an affiliate or JV deal is great, but the entry point is a partner level relationship build. You do not want to get your guests to pay, because then you're not leading with that valuable gift. So just no, don't do it. Instead, start being the connector. You'll get much bigger wins, and you won't come across as a slime ball at any point. So, connection 1 email. Hi name, I don't know if you know, previous podcast guest, but it occurs to me you're both working in the product or project market space. You both spoke with me about significant challenges you've had on the podcast. So if you aren't already connected, I have a strong hunch you should be. Let me know if you're open to an intro and I'll make it happen. Warmest, your name. P.S. You'll find that person's episode here. So what you're doing is you are making this happen even if someone hasn't asked for it, because people are busy and they don't know who's been on your podcast, and you can't expect them to have listened to your podcast. But if you really think about it, you can put people together and create massive value. So you remember that alumni email from the last lesson. This is how easy it is. Every guest on your show now has something in common, and that is you being on the same podcast. So this is a great way to build your relationship capital and continue to stay top of mind. Look, if your target market and how you help them is clear, this is going to work for you if you execute, if you do this. So while others blast their email list and you keep in touch with yours and you put focus on people who already know you and already know that you're a decent professional who actually cares. So it's a respectful double opt-in, this one. This email is about, would you like an intro? Let me know. Let me see if I can connect it. And from the PS in this email, you can quickly show them, to get a sense of this person, here's the episode I recorded with them. And ideally, if you've sent a name to Rob, Rob's going to say to you, your name's Sarah, by the way, at this point, thanks so much, love the audio post. Oh my God, I didn't know you knew Carly from Carly's Crazy Cakes. I'd love an intro. Thanks, Rob. It's going to happen, right? Super simple. Sarah's going to send an email. You're going to send an email. My pleasure. Glad you like the thing that I sent you. Please share it with your network. Happy to be asked Carly if she's open to connect. I know she's busy like you, but is there anything specific I can say? And actually, Rob's gone and listened to Carly's episode and said, yeah, sure. I'm a huge fan of her product and would like to find out if she'd be free to bake for our best client's Christmas party. Cool. Connection 3. Then you do it, right? You make the intro. Hi, Carly. Just been in touch with Rob, who's got an event coming up I think you might be a good fit for. He was also on the podcast. Here's his episode. Let me know. I'll make the intro. P.S. Let me know if there's anyone you'd like me to connect you with. Here's a link to all the people I've spoken with. So then you're taking one and you're just increasing value. Carly's got a lead, right? She's got a business lead. And then you can be super clear. You can either send that, copy them both in, or you can just send a separate one, making the intro as promised. Warmest. Done. Right? BCC, bow out. And then maybe a week later, follow up. How did it go, guys? Just checking in. Did you manage to connect? That's a pretty cool way to do it, because sometimes stuff gets in the way and it's good to just make sure that happened, and it gives them a chance to say thank you. And that means you're top of mind. So next steps, decide on your alumni connection strategy, add it to your Trello project board. Do these people know each other? Do they credit me with connecting them? Sometimes they'll know each other already, right? But sometimes they won't, and that's cool. And I will promise to show you in a minute, I know I've spoken about it in the book, but I promise to show you how all this works to keep you out of overwhelm. So what we've covered in this session, to understand how you can become a connector within your network in order to establish your authority. Create your POD-LATIONSHIP cycle. So I've given you a load of stuff. I've given you a load of emails, systems. I've talked you through them. You're possibly a bit overwhelmed, but by the end of this session, you will have set up your own Trello or Asana board with your POD-LATIONSHIP cycle. So you've got like a visual dashboard. You're going to have a strategy for using your solo podcast to build your business as well. And here's what I'm going to show you how to set up. Your Pod Perfect invitation pool. This is a list of your dream guests, including information about them. Messaging. So this is where you're going to move the card once communication has been established and you start hearing back from that potential guest. And Pod Booked is a section where once your show has been booked, it's Pod Booked, right? And then Pod Communication. These are those 4 follow-up emails that I've just talked you through. And quarterly follow-up and matchmaking, which was a little bit of the alumni stuff we talked about as well. You're also going to have a section for solo show ideas and a section for when they've actually been produced. So we've talked about elements of all of that, but what does it look like visually? How do you plan it? How do you organize it? All of that stuff. So if you've got a Trello open, then you'll see it has individual cards. And here is an example of a stack of cards, and this is that first one. So the Pod Perfect invitation pool, you can see there's a ton of names in there, and when you click on each of those blue cards, you can change colors and you can even have photos of those people if you want. You can open those cards up, and inside those cards you've got all the information you need about that person that you've collected. You can keep adding to it as well. So this is Leanne Jones, who I think featured much earlier, a few hours ago, and everything we know about her. Then on the next stack of cards, so over on the right hand side, you've got messaging. So you're already in touch with Jenny, James and Renee, and they are, communicating with you. You're working out the finer details, etc., and all being well, they grab that booking link and then they end up in Pod Booked. So you always should have a ton of people over here, a ton of people to invite. You're probably going to have slightly less people you're talking to because not everyone you invite is going to reply. And then booked people, you're going to have a few of those. And then you've got this kind of overall communication. So the post recording has been sent and the You're Live has been sent to Saeed. And then you're already on email 3. So you're 3 emails in with Wendy. And then you can move it across to quarterly follow-up. Everybody gets dragged in to keep in touch. So Jamal Johnson's got a due date of what is now the past, but is the 6th of January 2022. And I can change that to another 6 months' time to make sure I stay in touch with him. Now let's talk about solo show ideas. You can also use these cards to talk about certain things. So this one's called Long Haul Flights Without Jet Lag. I've got a framework of what I think this podcast might be about. So the challenge is frequent flyers risk peak performance after long journeys. And the desire is that they need to be fresh and ready to deliver to the clients in person. And the solution is going to be about diet tips and multiple trip bookings and upgrade tips so that journeys can be more restful so they get a better result. Now, the broad target market for this is all post-pandemic business travelers who listen. So people are starting to travel again after the pandemic. And now I'm really interested in just kind of touching base with that type of target market. But specifically, Tanya at EcoCon and Joanna F at Entremax, these are both fake companies, both have in-person events in quarter 2. And I know that they're going to be banking on people to fly to their events. So if I'm in the business of helping people with travel and with healthy travel, for example, these are the kinds of people I'm going to say, hey, Tanya, check out this episode I've just recorded. What do you think of it? And she might say, hopefully, I'll share it with my people, right? So you've got a bank of solo show ideas, best business books for leadership, habit stacking, the one about rock climbing, whatever it might be. And then once you've recorded, just made these up obviously, how to eat spaghetti whilst wearing a white shirt, 5 ways to get fit from your desk, finding the ideal client at an airport, which is actually something that happened to one of my clients, and how to run for office, which is also something that happened to one of my clients as well. So they're the kinds of things you can just have a bank of ideas and a bank of things you've recorded and just track them, put them in the Kanban system. If it's Trello, it's Trello. If it's Asana, it's Asana. If it's something else, whatever. Just make sure they're all on one dashboard. So next steps, set up that POD-LATIONSHIP cycle in your chosen piece of software so you have that dashboard available. You can see where you are in the relationship process with guests and also where you are with your own solo stuff. So what we've covered is to set up that board and have a strategy for using those solo podcasts to build your business. Have a reason to put those solo podcasts together so that you can share them and even reshare them when you meet somebody and you think, hold on a minute, that person's got a challenge that I addressed 6 months ago in a podcast, and you can see straight away. You don't have to go through your website and check what you've done and what you haven't done. So really good organizational tool, the POD-LATIONSHIP cycle. How to use your podcast to grow your network and authority with existing and potential clients. So by the end of this session, you're going to understand how to use your podcast to stay top of mind with existing customers and convert potential customers. And this is about sending a specific episode to a current client and telling them that you created that episode with them in mind. Sometimes I call this the prescription pod method. I think that's what it's called in my book. It's certainly how I've been framing it to people. This is a prescription that you are giving someone a specific episode so that they can get the next step to the result they're looking for. So reach out script as a email or a message. Hey, so-and-so, this podcast episode is perfect for you. I haven't heard from you in a while. Are you still struggling with this thing? Are you still working on this thing? Might actually flip that and say, are you still looking at this? Are you still working on that? Maybe getting a sign of life and then saying, well, do you know what? I created this for you. So send a specific episode to someone who wants to pick your brain. Maybe they'll become a client listening to it. That's really important, because what will happen, as you probably experienced to a certain degree, is people want to pick your brain, which is not a very nice thing to do, especially if they're not paying for it. What you can do is say, what's up, in a couple of lines, what you're trying to do with your business, what you're trying to do with your whatever it is they do that you help them with, and they will tell you in a couple of lines, and you will be able to say, thanks for letting me know. A great place to start is episode 6 of my podcast, which addresses that exact thing. Have a listen to it and let me know what was most useful for you. So you're giving them a gift, you're not giving them time, and you're giving them value. And if they're the kind of person who isn't a tire kicker and the kind of person who might end up hiring you, you're already that much further in and you've earned that trust. So what we've covered in this session is to use your podcast to stay top of mind with existing customers. Look, this is something you work with me, you're a client, check this out, additional value, and also convert potential customers without them being a complete time suck. 6 ways to generate revenue from your podcast. So we're getting into the bonus bits now, but still good to know. So by the end of this session, you'll decide if you want to monetize your podcast or not in some of the more traditional ways, and choose the best options to monetize your podcast, keeping in mind your goals and the size of your team. And monetize your podcast is a term that is floated around all the podcast shows I've ever been to and means different things to different people. So the question is for you is, if you're going to make your podcast a business asset directly, i.e. you're going to use your podcast to take money, you got to understand when the right time is to monetize your podcast. And if you've read my book, I say, well, never. In fact, if you're down with this method, I'm not the kind of person you should be working with now if your podcast is your business. But that said, this can happen, right? What happens if you end up with a podcast that also is a commercial hit, that also has a ton of listeners? Well, I have a duty of care to at least give you a bit of clarity around other outcomes that aren't just narrow or profitable pod method skills sessions focused, right? So should you consider monetizing your podcast? Number one, the goal of a narrow podcast isn't to help you become an influencer who sells their podcast to the highest sponsor each month. It's to help you grow your business with the happy byproduct of filling your list with your ideal target customer for your business. You grow your business as a priority, not your podcast. But here are 6 ways to create revenue from your podcast. There's your weekly email. There's your lead magnet funnel. There's targeted content upgrades, sponsorship and advertising, and partnerships and dynamic ads. So let's go through each one of those. So your weekly email, let your list know who is on your show this week. And in the PS, let them know how they can work with you right now. This is your out there stuff. So systemize it, give it a personal tone, and use Dean Jackson super signature. So whenever you're ready, here are 3 ways you can work with me. You can get my book, get my course, work with me one-on-one, whatever it might be. There's versions of that. So Google super signature Dean Jackson for a few ideas. It's a pretty cool tool. Okay, number 2, lead magnet funnel. You should have this anyway, and we've spoken about it way earlier in terms of preparing your website and your business to have a podcast in the first place. The listener gives you their information in exchange for your freebie. You send them your freebie, ideally automated, and follow up with appropriate offers. This is slightly different from targeted content upgrades because you can do essentially a version of a lead magnet, if you like, for every single episode you put out. So what that means is you can talk about very specific things you've learned and things you've taken from your guests and spin it into your own content. And so that will help you create specific leads from specific episodes, that should say, not shows, and enhances the user experience and is specific to that episode they've listened to. So that enhances the listener, the user experience. It's specific to that episode they've listened to. It helps you segment your list so that you can target your communication based on what they are interested in, and it allows you to measure how each show performs. So example script, if you enjoyed this episode, you can download content upgrade about this subject. Here's the link. Frankly, you'll probably need a tech team for this. There's quite a lot of faffing around inside different CRMs and websites and stuff, but it's kind of a cool way of just focusing on getting really specific with what you're doing. Now look, traditional advertising, whatever that means these days, your business should be the sponsor of your podcast and your lead magnet should be the ad. That's how I view it, and it's really simple to do. I recommend you not go down the route of traditional advertising in terms of getting people to pay to be sponsors of your show. And if you do decide to accept sponsors, do it based on the quality of your guests and listeners, not the number of listeners you have. People will say, how many listeners do you have? And you might have 10 listeners a week, but if 3 of those are clients, then you've got a great podcast that's making you money. So be careful about that. I would probably more look towards the next thing, which are paid partnerships. So you might choose to accept a paid partnership from those who have the same target market as you, but who offer something different. So they're likely to be excited about speaking and willing to pay to get in front of a small audience of highly engaged group of listeners like yours. Let me be clear, this is not them paying to be a guest on your show. I think you should probably have them on your show if they're likely to turn into a paid partner. But what that means is you could do an advert using the next thing that I'm about to talk to you about that sits in the middle of your show, and you can say, just a quick word about my friends over at this company who do this for people just like us, right? So that's a really strong way of doing it. What you don't want to do is go to a random ads marketplace and click insert adverts, because then you'll get who knows what all over your show and you don't have control of it. And frankly, you'll probably earn about 30 cents every 3 months anyway, so there's no point. It kind of ruins your vibe, ruins your brand. Dynamic ads. These are the most incredible things in the world, and you can use them in loads of different ways. Don't experiment with this beyond using them for your own lead magnet, and don't get into this unless you're working with a production company, you've got 6 months of shows in your portfolio, or you have a fantastic internal team that can manage all of this stuff. What this means, it kind of works like a website banner ad. You're probably familiar with those where they change. You go back to Amazon and the adverts at the top change, or you go to Netflix and the things they're promoting at the top change depending on what they've got this month, what the new releases are. That's like a dynamic ad. We can do the same in podcasting. And you can change those ads depending on if you want to use a slot for your own stuff, which is exactly where I suggest you do it. You can sell it to a sponsor for a limited time, and it will cover all of the shows. If you say sell a pre-roll or a post-roll, so the beginning or the end, the most valuable parts of your podcast, so don't sell them to anyone, probably don't sell them at all, or a mid-roll, the advert in the middle, you can sell those for a limited amount of time for 6 months, and they will go potentially across every single podcast you have. So this is very much a later on thing. You can't do it when you've got 3 episodes. You could sell it to a competitor if they don't re-up, which is why you don't want to sell them a mid-roll forever. You want to sell them 3 months, because then they'll want to secure that 3 months again if you're going well. So you can sell it to the competitor, or you can resell it to the same sponsor once that period is up. And you can renegotiate as well, because if your podcast is getting more listens, then it makes sense they might pay a bit more in 3 months' time than they initially did. By the way, please do not let this stuff stop you from starting your podcast and blinding you from creating pivotal relationships. Work with a production company who can timestamp your ad for you so that you can easily switch it and move it and do all of that stuff. This is kind of boring technical work, but it's an amazing tool. Dynamic ads are still an amazing tool for your own ads, for your own lead magnets, etc. Things to keep in mind. Think about what one of your listeners is worth as a customer to the company buying ad space from you, and charge accordingly. So don't just say, well, we get 5 listeners a month, so therefore you only give me $1. You want to say, we get 5 listeners a month, but 3 of them are my clients already. Let me tell you, without revealing who they are, the size of businesses they run, right? You could have a very, very small amount of listeners, hopefully more than 5, but you can tell them a lot about your business, and they're buying a partnership with you. One of the vehicles is your podcast. It's not the only thing. You should read your own ads instead of using what the sponsor might give you. Not some audio by some random. You want that trust with your own voice, and that's traditionally what builds trust with your audience than a kind of super overproduced commercial. And don't work with more than 3 advertisers at a time. Absolutely max. Remember, this is a later thing. Main point, your goal is to grow your business, not your podcast. So this is just almost for awareness. I almost didn't include this, but you need to know about podcasting, and there's some nice things in there just to get you thinking and understanding the podcast industry. You're not in the podcast industry, remember? So let's move on. But first, next steps. There's a worksheet you can download to help you decide if you want to monetize your podcast or not. Look, if you're listening to this, you've got 500 episodes. Maybe this is a conversation we would have. Otherwise, not so much. You're going to set up your content upgrade bank if you want to add targeted content upgrades to your episode. 99.9% sure that you're going to want to outsource this stuff. It costs you a lot of time, and you've probably got better ways to spend it. What we covered in this session: decide if you want to monetize your podcast or not. Choose the best options to monetize it, keeping in mind your goals and the size of your team. And I'm going to go back to this final slide just to finish. Your goal is to grow your business, not your podcast. So, there you go. Awareness only, please. How to build a podcast to serve your business. By the end of this session, You're going to understand your options for help and support should you need it. Don't try to be for everyone, or else you'll end up being for no one. There's a chapter in my book about a man called Dave. You might want to have a check of that. It's the last chapter, funnily enough. Your goal from doing this course, going through these videos, going through these skill sessions, is to build a podcast to serve the business you're building already. Do not get distracted and think you're a podcaster with a podcast business. That's not what this is for. Please remember. So this is why I created the narrow podcasting system, why I created the profitable pod method, why I created the POD-LATIONSHIP cycle, why I created the post-coital pod moment, all of that kind of stuff, right? I created it to save you time, to save you money, and to save you from buying the wrong gear or investing in the wrong things, and to save you from doing the wrong things, and to ensure that you do the right things in the right order. That means taking the most effective steps for you at the right time and staying out of overwhelm. Narrow podcasting is the key to giving your business a voice and letting your work speak for itself. And remember, as a business owner, your time is best spent doing only what you can do. So how else can I help you? Well, you can get my book, Narrow Podcasting. And I get that you might want to break from my dulcet tones right now, but if you haven't, there is an audiobook, and it's on Audible. It's free if you don't have an Audible account. First book's always free. You can grab it on Kindle. You can get the hard copy over on Amazon. Internationally, you can get in touch with me and talk to me about great podcast hosting deals, because I have very good relationships with a number of fantastic, good podcast hosts. That's the techie bit. You can work with me and my team to get broadcast quality production services. That means all the editing, all of that stuff's done, all the uploading to your podcast host is done, and you just get to grab the code, pop it on your website, pop the show notes on your website too, and you are sorted. If you are a professional in the podcasting world and you would like this system and to use this system properly and you want my guidance and help, then you can get in touch about that. If you are in business specifically, I like working with legal, healthcare, and environment, space. I spent a lot of time in space for some reason, which has been fantastic. Those are the kind of industries I'm interested in working with. You can apply to work with me one-to-one. You can find all that information over at narrowpodcasting.com. So your next steps, find out how you can get the help and support you need to build your podcast in a way that allows you to stay doing what you do best and build your business. And of course, that's what we have covered in this section. For all the help you need, come and find me over at narrowpodcasting.com. And finally, let's talk about where to go to get support for your podcast. And by the end of this session, I want you to make sure you have everything in place to build and launch a podcast that grows your business, or have those things in place to improve the one you already have if you're going for a relaunch or rebrand. And identify what you still need help with and where you can go to get that. I'm going to show you that, of course. You can download a narrow podcasting checklist and help you. If you haven't already got that, this is what it covers. So number 1, show planning and positioning, what you need help with. Identify your target market. You should have that already. If you haven't, you're not ready for a podcast, but you might need my help. Picking a strong show title and tagline. Creating your freebie. Making sure you have great looking artwork. Probably a delegation at this point. Canva's fun, but you're probably not a graphic designer. Gear, tech stack, production. What I need help with. So signing up for a legitimate hosting package. Make sure you own your asset. Pay for your hosting. It's worth every penny or cent. Purchase quality recording equipment. Probably about £500, $500 max for a office setup is going to get you something absolutely awesome. But make sure you're in a good environment, soft furnishings, no echoey stuff, no flight paths out the window, no massive fan noises, all of that stuff. As soon as you can, use professional production services. That's something I can help you with, my team can help you with. Set up an automated CRM and email system, and make sure that it's linked to the website you have so that you've got some basic automation going and you're not having to manually do everything. Set up a system, like I say, I like Trello to run the POD-LATIONSHIP cycle, and a system and creating templates to easily create your social media assets. Again, something you can farm out to production or to social media people, but if you're not quite ready yet, you need that system in place, and then you can hand it off later when you're ready. Your website, what do you need help with? Setting up a blog section for each individual podcast, setting up a section for your podcast, setting up a booking page for potential guests, setting up a lead magnet opt-in page. Now, pre-launch and production, what do you need help with there? Writing and recording your intro, your outro, your lead magnet, and a teaser and trailer script elements. Slightly different. The teaser is for the specific episode. The trailer is a trailer. That definitely should be you. Planning your first 10 episodes of launch. Deciding who to invite as guests, along with identifying good, better, and best outcomes for each potential guest. Remember, don't go for the big stars who are on all the podcasts. It's not going to help you at all. Go for people you know, go for clients, go for case studies, make it unique, make it personal. Booking and recording interview episodes, have that system set out, and also creating those solo episodes. So if you're going to do a 10 episode launch, you need 5 interviews in the can, and you need 5 short 5 to 10 minute episodes. You need your audio edited. You need to make sure the music, if you're using music and sound design, is matched to the tone and the mood of your show. Writing SEO show notes with pull-out quotes. Uploading your podcast to your hosting platform. And creating your podcast artwork. That's your album artwork, the full podcast, and also each episode artwork as well. Remember, you don't have to do all this. You can outsource most of it, right? The only thing you can't outsource is the conversation. And in some cases, you can do that. Set up that keep in touch strategy. Use Trello. Find ways to serve your network. Go with intent to your network, your LinkedIn, your past clients. Look at more ways to help them. That's where the money is in the list, and the money is in the past clients and those relationships. So what we've covered is a gigantic checklist to make sure that you have everything in place to build and launch a podcast that grows your business. Identify what you still need help with and where you can go and get that help. And so your next steps, well, now that you've identified what you still need help with, go to narrowpodcasting.com, book a call with me or my team. I can help you get your to-do list done and your podcast out into the world. And take a moment to note what has been most helpful to you looking through these sessions, and think about if you'd like support to implement it. It might be right at the front end with a website, or it might be right at the back end with the specific follow-up and relationships with clients, and of course in between all the production and technical stuff. And look, I can't help everyone and my team cannot help everyone, but if delegating your podcast production needs a team who have produced hundreds, if not thousands of episodes with that profitable pod method behind it and that methodology in there, visit narrowpodcasting.com and we'll take you through the next steps. You made it. If you didn't skip anything, I applaud you. I hope you took a few breaks. I told you at the start of this video I would share how you can use your podcast to attract and retain your ideal clients, create powerful referrals and partnerships, and even find top talent. The best way to start is just to start. But the truth is, all of my clients have very different needs at different times, and the only way to know if I can support you on your next step with your business positioning, messaging, and communication, including one-to-one strategic advisory and podcast production, is to find and connect with me on LinkedIn and over at narrowpodcasting.com.